great privilege and honor for the Metro Historical Commission to co-sponsor this event with Tennessee State University each year since its creation in 1981. And today's conference is a special one as we commemorate the sesquicentennial, the 150th anniversary of Fisk University, one of our country's most historic universities. I know you're going to be both educated and inspired as you learn more about Fisk and its legacy. Before we get started, I want to recognize and thank the conference's planning committee. Would you please stand as I call your name? First, longtime co-chairs of the event, Dr. Revis Mitchell and Linda Wynn. And committee members, Gloria Johnson, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts at TSU, Pamela Bobo, Laurel Kennerson, Lori McKissick, Tara Milnick, Jamal Sheets, Sharon Hull Smith, and Lee Williams. At this time, I'd also like to recognize the members of the Historical Commission. Would you please stand? And finally, I'd like to recognize or thank those working the registration this morning, Avon and Scarlett Miles. I don't know if they can hear me, but we appreciate their work at the registration. To finish this morning's welcome, I'd like to introduce Ms. Linda Wynn. If you know Ms. Wynn, you know she's a very busy woman. In addition to being a co-founder of the conference, she is a noted writer and historian, a faculty member of the History Department at Fisk University, Assistant Director of State Programs at the Tennessee Historical Commission, and she serves on the Metro Historical Commission. Ms. Linda Wynn.
I would like to welcome each and every one of you to the 35th Annual Conference on Nashville's African American Culture and History. When we started this in 1981, Dr. Levitt, I don't think any of us had the idea that we would be still going 35 years later. I think that is a great testament not only to those who planned the committee, the planning committee, but those of you who have come out each and every year to support this event. In addition to those who are working on the registration desk, I want to personally give special commendations to Cordia McCutcheon and Yvonne Ogren, who make being co-chair seem so easy. They take care of all of the details of putting it together in this facility. Also, I'd like to thank the contributors for the conference. We received contributions from churches and the registration, and that is what helps to fund the conference each year. If I may take some personal preference, I would like to recognize my colleagues at the Tennessee Historical Commission, Executive Director Patrick McIntyre, Assistant Director for Federal Programs Claudette Steger, Historic Preservation Specialist Carolyn Eller, and Dan Brown, who works with all of our state-owned historic sites. It is great when your colleagues come out and support you. This year, we're celebrating the sesquicentennial, the third jubilee, the 150th anniversary of Fisk University. But it's also the beginning of the 150th anniversary of Reconstruction. It is the 150th anniversary of the passage and ratification of the 1866 Memphis Massacre. It is, and that massacre, I might say, led to the passage of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which granted citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States, which included formerly held slaves. It's also the 150th anniversary of the 1866 Civil Rights Act. And it's the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Black Panther Party. So without further ado, we will begin the program. And again, I would like to thank each and every one of you for coming out. I was a little nervous all week. I didn't know if we would have snow. It was very unpredictable, and even this morning they were talking about some snow flurries. So again, thank you, and I hope you will enjoy the program.
Good morning, and welcome to the 35th Annual Conference on African American History and Culture. I will be the mistress of ceremonies for our morning presentations. Before I introduce our first speaker, I'd like to also acknowledge some individuals in the audience. Dr. Eric Schmeller, the former department chair of history at TSU, and Dr. Joel Dark are always, is also here. Dr. Bobby Lovett is here. Bobby Lovett is one of the founders of this conference, and it's always a welcome and a surprise to have him in the audience as well. A few things, housekeeping details. If you would please silence your cell phones, it would greatly be appreciated. We will break accordingly and try to stick as close to the schedule as possible. Okay. Our first presentation will be given by Jamal Sheets. Jamal is currently the director and curator of the Fisk University Galleries. He's also assistant professor of the art department at Fisk University. In keeping his bio as short as possible, would you please welcome Jamal Sheets.
Thank you for the introduction. Fisk University houses nearly 4,000 objects in its collection. Each one of those collections really tells a story about how the collection was formed, how the collection is used, and is really truly an inspiration to our students. Now, in 1949, George O'Keeffe, In 1949, November 4th, George O'Keeffe donated the Stevens Collection to Fisk University. The collection itself is a teaching collection. It was 100 works of modernist, European and American modernist artists. And it really tells you the earliest modernist from excuse me, you all, I am nervous, and I do apologize. But the Stevens Collection is a survey of modernist art. It is a teaching collection. The collection ranges from the 1890s to 1944. The collection was donated to Fisk for several different reasons. One was that George O'Keeffe wanted to preserve the legacy of Alfred Stieglitz. And then two, she wanted people to have access. But in thinking about our collection, the foundation starts well before that. The foundation for the collection actually started in 1874 when Avon, a British artist who was the artist for the royal court, painted the Jubilee Singers. Now this was not only important because it was his most ambitious work, but it was also important because the way that he painted the Jubilee Singers with dignity and pride and grace, as opposed to ways that African Americans were depicted at that time. This piece also started the collections at Fisk. In 1976, Harper's Weekly reported the progress of an African and Native American art collection that was being housed in the basement of the Bennett Hall. In 1930, Aaron Douglas completed his monumental mural cycle in Garath Hall. And in 1931, Samuel Insull donated a collection of 300 watercolors by Cyrus Baldwin, an American illustrator. And the New York Times stated that Fisk was becoming a cultural center in 1931. In 1944, Aaron Douglas was commissioned to paint Building More Stately Mansions for the International Center. The International Center was also a place for people where they would have talks and discussions about art. In 1946, President Johnson was appointed as the first black president of Fisk University. Now, during that time, prior to that, he was he started the sociology department, chaired the sociology department. But he had a philosophy that art was the soft armor of the nation. And so with that philosophy, he built programming to incorporate the arts in all of the academic disciplines. In 1946, Carvin and Beck donated over 400 photographs for the collection. And so by the time 1949 came around, Fisk University was already the sanctuary of culture. George O'Keeffe was strategic in placement of it in terms of its location, and in terms of its location. She wanted to preserve the role and the legacy of Alfred Stieglitz. But it was fitting that the collection was placed in a building that not only was once an Episcopal church, but also a gymnasium for calisthenics. And now it's named after Carvin Beckton Art. Now it's named the Carvin Beckton Art Gallery. The promoter, the philanthropist, the photographer, the bridge builder. In 1950, when All Rice donates a set of portraits from the Harlem Renaissance, the new Mecca series, the new Negro Mecca series, and St. Helen in honor of his student, mentor, and friend, Aaron Douglas. In 1951, we also acquired, or the piece was donated by the artist of Chicago, Henry Onspontan's Three Marys. Henry Onspontan's Three Marys is an iconic piece for several reasons. It's actually one of my favorite pieces. It was a piece that, growing up, in every history book or every book, I would see a few images, and only to find out when I came to Fisk that it was actually in our collection. But Henry Tanner, this piece is important for the collection because it kind of signifies a time and place where African-American artists, if there were an African artist of note, they had to come through Fisk University. In 1966, Aaron Douglas was appointed the chair of the art department, and Ballantine Hall was renovated and served as a gallery. In 1974, actually in 1968, the Harmon Foundation loaned artworks to the collection, about 400 pieces. And then that was later transferred to Tulane University. But in 1974, they donated works to the collection. Now this is a piece by James A. Porter. James A. Porter was the chair of the art department at Howard. He was also David Driscoll's David Driscoll's student and mentor. And the reason why this piece is kind of important is because when you look at the history of that time, that they were developing a pipeline. And what I mean by that is that Stephanie Pogue, Earl Hooks, that David Driscoll could call James Porter and say, who is the artist or who is coming out, and he brought them on as faculty. And during that time, he brought Stephanie Pogue, Martin Purrier, Earl Hooks, and he also developed a strong exhibition cycle. Shows for Charles White, Alma Thomas, Walter Williams, Elizabeth Catlett, and Romare Bearden. And we still have those works in the collection. And so, we still have those works in the collection. And so Fisk University Galleries, once again, is composed of 4,000 works, and each piece tells a different story. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamal. Before I introduce our next presenter, I'd like to acknowledge our financial supporters. Every year, Brother Youssef with the Kibalon Images not only sets his wares in the lobby, but he also provides the refreshments for our morning session. I'd also like to acknowledge the Holy Trinity Episcopal Church, Spruce Street Baptist Church, Jefferson Street Missionary Baptist Church, the Tennessee Historical Society, and the TSU Friends of the Library. Our next presenter needs no introduction. He will be discussing the founding of Fisk University, one of America's greater institutions of higher learning. He is the Dean of the School of Humanities and Behavioral Sciences at Fisk. And the only thing that I have left to say is Dr. Revis Mitchell.
Thank you, Professor Bobo. Good morning. Good morning. It is certainly an honor and a pleasure to be a part of this conference, to present to you. I'm a little nervous this morning because so many distinguished historians in the audience and so many people are here, and so many people know so much about the institution that I'm going to discuss briefly. It was encouraging to begin by hearing Jamal Sheets. Jamal Sheets follows his professor. His professor was Gregory Ridley, who for years sat on this committee and was a part of this conference. Gregory Ridley was the student of Aaron Douglas, so there are connections and legacies, and we try to maintain that. So I'm standing here this morning, I'm nervous enough, and I walk up on the lobby and there's Bobby Lovett. Now, 30 years Bobby Lovett told me, you got to do a paper if you're going to be on the committee, and I felt just like Jamal. I felt just like Jamal, you know. And 30 years from now, Jamal's going to be smoother than I am standing here. So this helps you grow. Again, everybody does recognition. I mean, how often does a classroom historian get to speak before the state historical, the Tennessee historian? And Dr. Van West is with us. Wave, Van, state historian. And we're also honored with the Metro historian, Dr. Carol Busey. Wave, Carol. All right. And so I'm nervous enough, but for me this is like a faculty trial. I have the whole history department from Fisk, my distinguished colleague from the library, Dean Jesse Smith, and they're all sitting down there, and I have to come before them. But most importantly, I have all of you to discuss what's been called one of the signal institutions in the United States. Because what began in Fisk University in 1866 will be a pattern of inclusion. The Civil War, with all of its bloodshed, carried on something that the American Revolution did not. At the end of the American Revolution, I was still a slave. And at the end of the Civil War, I was free. You can't get past that. Tennessee holds a pivotal position in the history of the Civil War. The last state to leave the Union and the first state to be brought back in, Tennessee becomes a laboratory for the process of Reconstruction. In that process, pivotal is the concept of education. Those who founded the institution were dedicated to the idea that I am educable. Now, that may seem a foregone conclusion today, but at a time when the country had enslaved people who looked like me for 300 years, good people, good Christian people in the North and South and wherever, had to believe that the Negro was intellectually inferior. If I had not been inferior, I would have not been kept enslaved in this good Christian country for 300 years. At a time of turmoil in the South was disappointed. I tell people I'm a Southerner, I understand the South. The dreams of the old South were totally dismayed when I became free. Historian Kenneth Stamp, in his signal work, The Peculiar Institution, discusses the fact that in an area where people evaluate each other by how many humans they own, that there's a problem with the system. Right. Well, that problem is to be addressed with education. So on January the 9th, 1866, not very far from this site, a ceremony is held, a ceremony of dedication for the founding of an institution for all people. It was stunning about a month ago to hear historian Carol Busey, when addressing the Founders Day ceremonies at Fisk, discussing the fact that about 80% of the population, the African American population of Nashville, the free population, was literate when Fisk opened its doors. So Fisk will address the free population. It will also address those who were brought to Tennessee, the contraband, the former slaves, who are put on trains and brought to the Up South. And Tennessee and Nashville is a part of the Up South. And the question is, can they and will they be educated? So the founders of what was initially known as Fisk Free Colored School, because that's what it was a free school for former slaves, for free people of color, and for whites. Fisk in its history, like most HBCUs, like most African American culture, has never segregated, has never cast people out because of color. My people are and were the most inclusive people in the history of this country. On January the 9th, not very far from here, Bobby Luckett used to tease me. He'd talk about the founding. He said, well, you know, most of our people were setting up where the downtown campus is. Well, that's where we're sitting right now. But down on the state capitol, a group would come together from the American Missionary Association, the Western Freedmen's Aid Society, and others, political groups and organizations which were made up of abolitionists, those who wanted to abolish slavery. They thought about it. They planned for it. Tennessee had been selected actually as early as 1857, but in 1857-58, the legislature passed a law outlawing educating African Americans. Early on, it was understood that education was going to be the great equalizer. It was going to be difficult to keep a man or a woman enslaved when they were educated. So Tennessee outlaws education. The early charters, which today rest in the special collections at Fisk University and the John Hope and Aretha Franklin libraries. Look at that. But by January the 9th, with the assistance of funding from the 14th Amendment and the Freedmen's Bureau, an organization set up to provide education and medical need for the formerly enslaved, Fisk is born. Fisk is born. On that occasion, speeches were delivered by Clinton Bowen Fisk, Clinton Fisk was the general in charge of the Freedmen's Bureau in Tennessee. The school would bear his name, just as in Washington, D.C., the head of the Freedmen's Bureau, General O.O. Howard, the school would bear his name. Down in Georgia, there'd be several schools. But Fisk gets the opportunity, gets the early start. It's not the oldest historically black colleges. I always cringe when I hear my students who get very Fisk-phobic. We're the oldest of the historically black colleges. You're going to do away with Wilberforce in Ohio, Lincoln in Pennsylvania, Cheney in Pennsylvania. They operated in free states. This will be the oldest institution that will admit the former slaves. Those other institutions had to be very careful not to be attacking slavery by taking in runaways, those who couldn't prove their freedom. But this place, at the close of the Civil War, will take in all. Erastus Milo Cravath, the Reverend Dr. Erastus Milo Cravath, had been the head chaplain in the region. He will deliver a speech on that day, but the address was delivered by Governor William G. Parson Brownlow. It was a bold step for a Tennessee governor, a Republican from East Tennessee, to come forward and address the freedmen and to endorse and allow the beginning of this great experiment. And that's what it was. It was an experiment. We like to look at the religious aspects. We call the founders missionaries. At this point in my career, after looking into it, I want to say they were some of the oldest social scientists. They're going to tinker with the system. They're going to tinker with the system. Because if I'm not educable, if I can't hold a job and pay taxes, if I can't serve in the military and I'm not educated to vote, then I'm a drain on society. I'm a drain on culture. It was justifiable keeping me enslaved for all those years. And they're going to change the system. They're going to upset the system in the South where you didn't have free public education for whites. They're going to upset a system in Nashville, Tennessee, becoming, at that time, the oldest standing college in the city. It's not the oldest college in Tennessee. Again, my students get all upset about that. They want to make it oldest everything. That was, of course, the University of Tennessee over in East Tennessee. But in the region, in the city, that's what's going to happen. So on that day, the great action for the Negro, for black people. Something was done for me. Money comes in from the Freedmen's Bureau. The American Missionary Association is the conduit. They provide the services. The teachers come. The school begins. The school bears Fisk's name because he will allow for the use of Army barracks, hospitals. As the Union Army occupied Nashville, one of the first problems to be addressed was the railroad system. One of the great calamities the South faced in losing the Civil War was inability to move men and troops and whatever. You can't fight a war without being able to move men and equipment. The Southern railroads were like self-set traps. So they began the construction of a railroad. They construct a Union train station. But while they're here in the process, there's a great cholera epidemic because the ecosystem in Nashville, the biological systems weren't set up for influx of former slaves. An army, cholera would spread, so they had to stop building train stations, build a hospital. Well, that area, the present site of the Gulch, would be the first site of the free colored school. It's amazing, students, sometimes today, I tell students, when looking at the history of the institution within the institution, and I do have the honor of teaching the course, that we must always endeavor to neither be parochial or pedantic. Can't do that. You have to take a larger scope to see not what it did for Fisk or for these few people, but what's the impact on the culture? What's the impact on American culture? How does it change American culture? How does it justify all those lives? More Americans will die in the Civil War than die in the American Revolution, Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, and the first half of Vietnam. More Americans die in that war than died in all those wars combined. So it has to affect the culture. It has to affect the culture. So they're taught. They're taught to read and write. They're taught to cipher, do mathematics. Of course, the most popular course will be reading. And given the culture and ethic of the day, they learn to read the Bible. They want to read the Bible. The prevailing religious view was in order to go to heaven, you had to be able to read the Bible, you had to read it every day. And I always tell people, you want to go to heaven because if you lived through slavery, you'd live through hell. And they come. On the first day, over there, when the rolls counted, it's approximately 500 who signed up the first day. By March of that first year, more than 750 were enrolled in day, evening, somewhat classes. By June of that year, there were 1,000 students. We don't have 1,000 students at Fisk University today. It's a very different view. Nobody went out and herded them in. They came. My people came in large numbers. They came to avail themselves of this free education. Came to change their lives. But if you know the story of Fisk, you understand that what the government gives, the government can take away. And by 1870, the government had decided to put enough money in my reconstruction. They put enough money in funding education. You've kept me enslaved for 300 years, and you give me 4 years of support for my orientation to freedom. The money was gone. It wasn't refunded. There was no money. It was a free school, so most of the people didn't have jobs. Some came and paid tuition, but most didn't. So that's where, and I'll be brief, I'll see the timekeeper. That's where I can go into the second half of my paper, and that's founded by George White, who was the school's treasurer, who was white, had heard the students in their free time after class. He had heard them relaxing, harmonizing, what the students call today freestyling. He had heard them using music as a respite, as a tranquilizer. And George White came up with the idea, had the audacity to believe that these young African Americans, some enslaved, could do something for themselves, could in fact perform. Now this is the beginning of the era where, you know, as long as I was enslaved, as long as it looked like me to be enslaved, it said my inferiority. But post-slavery in America, you have the beginnings of what I call institutionalized racism. You already got people on the East Coast at respectable institutions beginning to classify race, social Darwinism. So again, it's a challenge to my humanity, to my intellect. Certainly within American culture, it's the beginnings of the minstrel show, the blackface comics. It's funny to spoof black people. But at this time, White believes that a group of students so disciplined, the group that Jamal showed you, the beautiful portrait by Havel, believes that they can raise money. We celebrate founded by at October the 6th at Fisk. That's the day when the Jubilee Singers leave on a worldwide tour. It becomes a worldwide tour. It wasn't worldwide at first. In August, they had gone to North Georgia and southern Tennessee and raised $46. But on October the 6th, they take off. They leave, the students leave. They aren't Jubilee Singers at the time. They're the Fisk students, the colored students, sometimes call them college minstrels. They leave on a tour. They travel first to Gallatin, Tennessee, where they raise $50. From Gallatin, Tennessee, they travel north to Ohio. They perform in Chillicothe. They perform at several points in Ohio. They raise money. Because of the connections I've discovered of one of the young people in the troupe, Miss Jenny Jackson, whose grandfather had been the body servant for Andrew Jackson, has enough political clout, and it's arranged, without political overtones of the party, for the students to appear at the White House for President Graham. Of course, they have to go through the back door, but they perform for the president. This tour will take them to Chicago, and they're to perform the day before the Chicago fire. Obviously, the performance didn't go on that day, but in several days later, they perform, but they will turn the money over, all but enough to feed them. They turn it over to the victims of the Chicago fire. It's a lovely story. It's a wonderful story. It's the kind of story that Hollywood has and does and continues to look at. Students will eventually travel to New York. And from those students' activities, from their activities, a great institution is maintained. But more than that, their impact on American culture. At a time when people see my people as unsophisticated, as undisciplined, believing that black folks always got to be moving, shaking. These are perfect, demure young Victorians. They are decked out in the finest that the school can provide. What's the treasurer's left when they leave? There's only $1 left in the treasury. But they present themselves in such a way. They present themselves in such a way. They raise the money to purchase the Union Army contraband camp where we're located, Old Fort Gillum. And because of their activities, the American Missionary Association and others purchased the land. Students return home after a trip in New York, and it's proposed that there be a European tour, that these young people travel to England, to Scotland, to Wales, carrying this music. On the evening before a monumental performance in Carnegie Hall, George O. White, who was a man of spirit, a God-fearing man, a Bible reader, would name the students. He referred to the period, the book of Leviticus, and the period of Jubilee. He said, not condescending, not patronizingly, but lovingly, "Children, you will be the Jubilee singers." And that's how the name was arrived at. They would travel to England, Scotland. They would perform before Victoria, Queen of England, at a time when Victoria is holding much of Africa under her dominion. Herbert Gephardt, the former chancellor at Belmont and quite a history buff, I saw his comments, I guess it was 30 years ago, a type column he did for the National Banner. And it was Gephardt who first informed me, when I was reading it, of a reference made. Victoria asked someone, "Who are these young people and where are they from?" And they told they were Jubilee singers and they were from Fisk University. She said, I don't know this city, Nashville, but it must certainly be a musical city. That's not from the PR department at Fisk University. I like to tell people when looking at Nashville, yes, the singers were the first musical group to travel out of Nashville. They didn't have a bus, but they traveled out of Nashville. The concept of music in Nashville. They performed at first the popular music of the day, but White was besieged by the singers, and they would present to the world a truly unique art form to come out of America. One of the few unique art forms of music to come out of America, the Negro spiritual. But they presented the spiritual like high opera. Their enunciation was perfect. Their demeanor was refined and respectable. They performed a cappella. Their voices were their instruments. They still perform a cappella. They were so disciplined. When you saw them then or you see them now, George L. White, the director, and this afternoon, Dr. Paul Kwame, never stand in front of the Jubilee singers to conduct. They are disciplined. They are musicians. They are articulate. They are each disciplined individuals. They perform without direction. They would raise enough money to erect Jubilee Hall on the campus. They would raise enough money to facilitate the American Missionary Association in their ventures to span out education. They'll raise enough money to help the American Missionary Association fund Atlanta University and Talladega College. They become the founding force for America and education for those who had been denied. That was, and that is, the story of Fisk. This year, and I think it was Linda Wynn who, I think I'll give her credit for selecting the topic or the theme for the conference, the third year of Jubilee, the third Jubilee. We hope it will continue. We think it's well worthwhile. We hope that America will someday embrace the mission of Fisk University, turning out educated individuals. I'm very proud to be on the faculty at Fisk for years. I tell people I'm an educator. I'm not a job trainer. I don't do job training, I do education. We educate people for lives, for direction, not just for jobs. At Fisk, we have a saying. We say it almost like a prayer. We say it reverently, and we mean it like a prayer. Fisk forever. Thank you very much. All my historical friends sitting there. References to this work can be found. The primary research was conducted in the special collections of the John Hope and Aurelia Franklin Library. References to Fisk University can be found by Joseph Richardson's book, history of Fisk University, 1866 to 1948. Dark Night When I Rise, that's the book by Andrew Ward, and I humbly submit to you my book, Thy All Children Make Thy Way, A History of Fisk University since 1966. I'm gone.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. Our next presentation will be given by Dr. Jessie Carney Smith, who has written or edited over 30 books on African American history themes. Dr. Smith is the Dean of Library Studies at Fisk University, and she holds the Camille Cosby Distinguished Chair in the Humanities at Fisk University. Would you please welcome Dr. Jessie Carney Smith.
I really started not to accept the invitation to speak to this conference when I realized that Dr. Revis Mitchell was going before me. In fact, I thought it made it clear to people some years ago that I don't want to be before him or after him, because he's so good, he's so colorful, and on top of all that, he's cute. But it is always a pleasure to be on program with you. And you will notice connections here between some things that I'm going to say, which you've heard already, because that's just how connected we are. Yes. Now I'm going to talk about some of the resources that we have at FISK. Some, because we have so many in our library, there's no way I can talk about all of them. And I tried to pull out the most interesting ones, and even that was difficult, because there's so many fascinating items there that it's just hard to pull out what I wanted to present to you. But we look at our beginnings. This is our library now, but we started out in another library. But when we started, right, very soon after it was started, it said that there were some materials by and about blacks collected that early. Our collections are among the oldest, the most definitive, and most distinguished collections of research in African American history in this country. So it's difficult to fix the time and date of the actual founding of our collections, but we suspect that when we were founded, when Chris was founded, there were some books, and we know there were some books there in what was called the library at that time. There was the Livingstone's journals and a journal of the discovery of the source of the Nile, and some other items there. So in 1928, this started this very systematic effort to collect materials by and about African American people. The library listed the aid of foreign dealers, and one of its outstanding purchases was a lot of 28 pamphlets and manuscripts dealing with the early history of black domestic servants in Europe. And then in 1929, we employed our first curator. We helped lay the groundwork for us, and I'll talk a little about the early purchases, and we appointed then Arthur Schomburg, and some of you may know that name from the Schomburg Library or Center in Harlem, the Harlem section of New York. He was quite a bibliophile, and he was a Puerto Rican of African descent. Very interested in collecting books by and about these people, because he asked one of his teachers if there were books about black people, what is my history, and the reply was, you have no history. And so determined he was to disprove that he started collecting everything he could by and about black people, and assembled quite a collection for us and for himself. And when he left us to go to New York, he continued to build a massive collection by and about black. So Fisk purchased in the Southern YMCA College Library in 1936. He had been under the direction of W.D. Weatherford, who had pioneered locally in acquiring materials in the field of race problems, something we had always been concerned about. He had specialized in securing materials related to African Americans prior to 1865, and Fisk, by that time, specialized in securing materials related to African Americans since 1865. So this was a good marriage, and the collections now had been considerably expanded in scope, size, and significance. Fisk also built an extensive collection of blacks in the West Indies and Africa, and its efforts resulted in a sizable pamphlet collection and manuscript collection covering the whole scope of black people's activities in the two areas. So let's take a look at some of our collections. We're going to talk about what we have from Charles Chestnut all the way to Julius Rosenwald and the rural schools that he founded. Charles Chestnut collection is one of the most used collections in our libraries. Some years we say this is Chestnut's year, some years Charles is Johnson's year, somebody else's year. Right now it's Chestnut's year. Chestnut was a precursor of the Harlem Renaissance, of that cultural period that you may know about, that we dealt with in Harlem in the 1920s and into a period of the 30s. His Chestnut collection has 16 manuscript boxes containing 2,100 items, and there we have correspondence, articles, plays, poems, speeches, journals, notebooks, and scrapbooks. There are even some unpublished works in this collection, and some of our researchers have begun to work on those to get them published. Chestnut won the Spingarn Medal, and we are lucky to have it in his collection. It's a beautiful medal. It's awarded annually by the NAACP for outstanding achievement by African Americans. It has a gold medallion on it. It was created in 1914 by Joel Spingarn, who was chairman of the board of the NAACP. It was first awarded to Ernest Just in 1915, and that's been awarded practically every year since then. have a collection of works by Thomas A. Dorsey. And, you can't get a very good idea here of what the items are like, but Dorsey's picture there himself. We know him for his most famous work, Precious Lord. And we had him at Fisk in the program back in the 80s, and he was kind of a little senile at that time. Whenever you would ask him, Mr. Dorsey, can I get you something? He would start singing Precious Lord. We were glad to get a concert from Mr. Dorsey. We have as well the Aaron Douglas collection. Aaron Douglas, a Harlem Renaissance artist, came to Fisk to establish our Department of Art and also to was commissioned to do the murals that Mark mentioned earlier. He painted murals in other libraries and other places, but those that are in our old library building, private hall, or worth a visit. If you haven't been there, take a look. We also have a number of wonderful books, mix them in with collection, manuscript collections when we're talking, because you really need to go through some of the books sometimes to round out your study. Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist and orator, reformer, and statesman, published 3 autobiographies. First one in 1845, and revised that on another title in 1855, and then a third one, The Life and Times of Frederick Douglass in 1882. And I was hoping we had all 3. Haven't maybe find the third one. We had it at some point, but you know, how works seem to disappear sometimes. That's what happens to it. So we do have 2 of his autobiographies. The Du Bois collection is one that we're quite proud of. Du Bois is one of our graduates, a writer, a scholar, activist, Pan-Africanist, educator. The collection contains 128 manuscript boxes divided into a number of series, and we have in those collections correspondence, work dealing with his organizational affiliations, writings. He did a study of black soldiers in World War I, and this is what we have here, a panorama of soldiers in World War, in one of the many that he did of soldiers in World War I, and another one of soldiers in World War I. Now, many of these manuscripts, these pictures were rolled, and then we had to unfold them. And so we are concerned about conservation, preservation as well. So this is how we flattened the panoramas that were in the Du Bois collection. With moisture underneath the image, and in about a week it's going to unfold, and then we can keep it flat. We have the plates of Du Bois's famous book, The Souls of Black Folk, which was published in 1903. We have the box that they've been kept in all these years. Someone is interested in studying these and has been to us to study them. In the 80s, our president republished The Souls of Black Folk in a Golden Jubilee edition. Limited edition as well, just distributed on campus and a few places off campus. At one time we had football. We have a number of images of our football team. Big guys. 51 games at first, and after a while we kind of petered out and we gave it up. We have the George Gershwin Memorial Collection of music and musical literature, founded by Harlem Renaissance benefactor Carl Van Vechten. You heard his name mentioned. The collection was founded in 1947 and named in honor of his friend, George Gershwin. It contains a considerable amount of sheet music representing black composers such as W.C. Handy, William Grant Still, and J. Rosalind Johnson, a number of manuscripts, many unmounted photos, and 11 large portfolios with mounted images. Can you hear me better? many more in the library. So at some point we want to do an exhibit of our beautiful Van Becken program. This is one by Van Becken, Billie Holiday, and another of the Waters. This is what collections look like many times when they come to you. Roland Hayes' collection came to us about 2 years ago, and we begin to process it now. And in fact, it looked worse than this when we first received it. We are working on it now to reprocess it. I think we have a flyer in your Mississippi today talking about Roland Hayes, who has become a very popular figure. He was a fifth student, not a graduate. Bobby Lovett has done some work in this area dealing with hospital record books, and this book, it was dated 1864. One of the hospital record books, one of the books of several hospitals here in Nashville where Union soldiers were recuperating. And the book gives you a lot of good information if you're interested in family history or just information on some of the soldiers in recuperating at that time. Very interesting, very valuable. Langston Hughes is represented in our collection as well. Before I get to him, I will mention, I don't have a slide on this one, George Edmund Haynes' collection. George Edmund Haynes was one of our graduates, and he became a founder of the National Urban League. He was a social worker and an educator, a scholar. He developed a pioneering program in social work education while at Fisk. He became involved in 3 organizations that merged to become the National Urban League. And these were the National League for the Protection of Colored Women, the Committee on Urban Conditions Among Negroes, and the Committee for Improving Industrial Conditions of Negroes, all precursors of the National Urban League. The collection is temporarily closed because it is extremely fragile. We're working on it. And now Langston Hughes' collection covers the period 1921 to 1966. He was a shining star of the Harlem Renaissance, and the collection is numbers 13 manuscript boxes, and includes a lot of his writings, interviews, playbills, programs, and so on. For example, the manuscript for his work, The Big C, is there, as is I Wonder as I Wonder. Langston Hughes was friendly with Arnold Vaughan Thompson, so that's one thing that brought him to Nashville a lot, sometimes for our Spring Arts Festival. We have a page from one of his works, The Ballad, and it's in fairly good condition. Before I get to James Weldon Johnson, I want to mention those of you who are interested in Black women writers. We have the papers of Pauline E. Hopkins, an editor, a playwright, singer, an actress. Dates of this collection are uncertain since many of the items simply mark about 1879 to about 1899. But Hopkins was an early Black woman writer from 1859, dates were 1859 to 1930. And people have become quite interested in her works now and come to us to take a look firsthand at items there, especially her scrap. Her works are found a lot in the journal, the older journal, The Colored American, which we also have. I did not bring images from the Charles S. Johnson collection, but Charles S. Johnson, as you heard earlier, was our first Black president. This collection is one of the most heavily used ones in our library, and he was a prolific writer, a social scientist. When he established the Department of Sociology at Fisk, that department became as important and rival to the one in Chapel Hill, which is how brilliant it was. The collection is used heavily. He was a very Renaissance of the 20th century. And we are very, this collection is enormous, that's all I can say about it. It includes also records of his tenure at Fisk as president. There is a lecture later this morning on James Weldon Johnson, and we have a small collection of works by James Weldon Johnson, dating from 1899 to 1952. But it is a very important research resource. It consists of only 2 manuscript boxes with 333 items, but it includes photographs and his death mask. And back in the earlier days, people decided they wanted to have a death mask made of their loved ones. And so it's not a pleasant thing to look at, but we have it and tip around it when I get involved, but we have one. Johnson wrote the words, as you know, to what we call the Negro National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. And his brother, J. Rosalind Johnson, wrote the music. When Johnson died, he was a professor of creative writing at Pitt. He also gave a speech at Fisk on Jubilee Day, and we have that in our collection. We have an outstanding collection of portraits on the Jubilee singers. And you saw this one earlier. This is one that's seen most often, but we have many older ones, and they are used quite a bit in various publications. We have a number of items in the whole collection. Photo album. Still not hearing you well? Can you hear me now? That's commercial, yes. We have a number of cute items in this collection, and we have a Jubilee Singers album, which you see how beautiful it is. It's because it has been conserved. And we had to send it out. That is a very expensive process, but well worth it. Jubilee Singers, the women carry these little purses when they travel with activities at night, and we're lucky to have a couple of them in our collection. We had a little trouble here trying to pull this out so I can operate it up here, and so you can hear me. So which would you rather do, hear me or see me? Ella Shepherd, who was a famous Jubilee singer, wrote, as far as I know, 2 diaries. One of them, 1877 to 1878, has been transcribed. And we allow researchers to use the transcription. The other one is very fragile, has not been transcribed. We're in the process of doing that now. It's a 2-year diary, covered years right after this diary. It's been used a lot for research. These men are members of the old Fisk Glee Club, 1899 to 1900. And you notice they're wearing hats. Back in those days, they wore hats and tipped them when they greeted women, but now they wear hoodies, and I don't know how you tip a hoodie. Scott Joplin collection, 1900 to 1951. Scott Joplin's collection contains correspondence, manuscripts, photographs, and sheet music. He was an itinerant pianist and composer, and this work, Maple Leaf Rag, was published in 1899, became his most famous work, and he did a number of operas, Premonition as well. This was his second opera, Premonition, completed in 1910. You may not know that Sting, the movie Sting, was based on Maple Leaf Rag. We were so glad to boast that we have that in our collection. John Mercer Langston. He was a lawyer, congressman, diplomat, and educator, quite a colorful figure during his time. And we are fortunate to have a small collection of items in the Langston collection. This is one done in 1885. He did a couple of scrapbooks. Well, I don't know how many he did. This said scrapbook 2. We seem not to have scrapbook 1, but this scrapbook 2 is in his collection. And this is an inside view of the scrapbook. Very proud of our Lincoln Bible. And so our students, they brag and brag about the Lincoln Bible. It was given to us by the Robert Todd Lincoln, son of President Lincoln. And it was given to Lincoln in an impressive ceremony in the White House on September the 7th, 1864, by a group of 19 loyal colored people of Baltimore. Back in those days, we were colored and loyal. And so those people from Baltimore who were colored and loyal decided to present this to Lincoln really out of respect for his work in freeing slaves, for his concern with emancipation of the race and so on. The Bible costs $580.75. It's pulpit size. You notice it looks like it's new is because it has been recovered about in the early 90s. Bound in royal velvet, and it has an emblem, gold emblem on the back and one on the front. All the three edges have gold on them, and double 4-inch paintings all around. It's a beautiful Bible, and earlier we used to let it go out on loan, but it became so fragile we stopped doing that. It did go down to the public library when it reopened, and we had National Guard, the U.S. Army, every guard you can think of. I don't know if you know anything about Poro College, but for black women in the audience, remember we had two very important early women who were involved in agriculture. One of them was Annie Turnbull Malone, who had a college to train people to work with her in treating black hair. She had agents also who went out to sell her products. And she called that college, the training program at that college, Poro College, founded in St. Louis in 1905 and later moved to Chicago. By that year as well, Madam C.J. Walker was one of her first students. And we think that perhaps McKissick architectural firm here in Nashville attended a conference, and Annie Malone gave out souvenirs at the conference. So that's the only connection that we have really with Poro College. But this is a scarce item, and we're very glad to have it in our collection. You heard early mention of minstrel sketches. We have a collection of, one time, 200 minstrel sketches. And here are two that we pulled out. They bear the images that were popular among those who wanted to depict us as happy slaves. And during a period when anytime blacks were depicted, it was in a grotesque form. And that's why we see those images on these minstrel sketches. the Nashville Negro Yearbook. So far, we have found only one. I'd like to know how many others were published, and we'll see if we can find others. The Julius Rosenwald Fund Archive at Disc is one of our most popular used collections as well. Go into our his web page, website, you'll see and you go to the library section on there, you will see this mention of the Rosenwald School Project, and we found a way to get into the slides and see what images we have there in that finding aid. This is very important in the history of black education in the South. Julius Rosenwald and Booker T. Washington of Tuskegee collaborated with Booker T's idea to start these schools back in the 19-teens, and the whole school system grew from there and expanded to 15 southern and border states. We have documents related to the Rosenwald Project, the school project, and a number of schools as well. We don't have all of them, we have them that came to us. There was an important Rosenwald office here in Nashville after the office in Tuskegee closed, where it was managed at first, and that office moved into Peabody College here in Nashville. And when that office closed, the papers came to Fisk. As well, Charles S. Johnson and Julius Rosenwald had a good relationship, and I think because of that, another reason the collection came to us. This is a document from the collection showing the Alpha and Omega schools, its first and last. The first school was founded in Alabama, the last school in Georgia, named for Eleanor Roosevelt. It was really a little beyond the period of the Roosevelt schools, but it was built anyway, named for her and Franklin Roosevelt. Look at this speech at the opening, and we have that speech in our collection. Here are some schools in Davidson County. This is from a scrapbook of a school in North Carolina, the Barry O'Kelly Training School, named for a black businessman in North Carolina. The scrapbook has been restored as best we could do because it was in such bad shape. The Rosenwald schools also, the school collection also has a transportation application book. And you will see some of the ugliest buses you've ever seen in your life in this collection. Here are some of them. I hope you can see them. But these schools now are in rural areas, so they had to have somebody to transport the children there, and they travel in these ugly buses. We have slave shackles in our collection, and here you see slave shackles surrounding slave's Bible. You were told earlier, Reverend Smith, I think, to read the Bible. Don't read this Bible, because this slave's Bible had all passages related to freedom removed. So if you want to read the Bible, read the Lincoln Bible. But we are proud of this. It's an unattractive Bible. I don't know how it was bound originally, but it's been rebound, and it's very unattractive, but it is a rare item, and we have one of the few that we know is that. So there you have some of the images in our collections. We invite you to come and see more, use our collections for your research, for your classes, and I think you will find that's quite a treasure. Well worth visiting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Can we have another round of applause for Dr. Jesse Price? We are on schedule At 10:30, we're going to take a break. We're a few minutes early, so we're going to take that 10-minute break now, 20-minute break. And when we return, we will hear Ms. Linda T. Wynn's presentation. So if you'll break and come back in 20 minutes. Thank you. Our next presenter is a rather easy person to introduce. The question at hand is, who is Linda T. Wynn? It would probably take 20 minutes, if not longer, to tell you who Linda T. Wynn is. And so we'll just condense this and remind you that she is the Assistant Director for State Programs of the Tennessee Historical Commission. She is a member of Fisk University's faculty. She is one of the co-founders of this conference and a current co-chairperson of this conference. Would you please welcome Ms. Linda T. Wynn?
Thank you, Pam. I was telling my colleagues, I don't know what was on my mind when I was putting the program together to have myself come after Drs. Revis Mitchell and Jesse Smith. They are both excellent speakers. I was sitting there thinking when I first started with the Tennessee Historical Commission decades ago, and I was asked to write an article. And I really was there in an administrative role, not as a historian. And so I went home and I was talking to my husband, Ronald Wynn, and I said, they've asked me to write an article and I have no idea what to write about. And Ronnie was a graduate of Fisk University, so he says, well, write about Fisk. And I said, well, what about Fisk? He says, now you know, being in historic preservation, that Jubilee Hall is the first permanent building for African Americans in higher education. Write about Jubilee Hall. So Fisk University started my writing career, and I've always been appreciative of that. This morning I am going to change my title. The title originally was The Evolution of Feminist Thought in the Works of W.B. Du Bois. And I rechanged that because as I thought about the evolution, it would take a lot of going through all of his works to determine how he evolved as a feminist. So the title now is W.E.B. Du Bois, an early feminist. William Edward Burgard Du Bois, better known as W.E.B. Du Bois, was a giant of the 20th century. A preeminent scholar, author, intellect, and activist, Du Bois is widely renowned for his tremendous contributions to the study of history and detailed explorations of African Americans. He is not only the pioneer and authority of African American intellectualism and Pan-Africanism. Recently, in the new groundbreaking work, The Scholar Denied, W.E.B. Du Bois and the Birth of Modern Sociology by Alden Morris, the Leon Forrest Professor of Sociology and African American Studies at Northwestern University, makes the compelling argument that Du Bois was the primary founder of modern sociology in America at the turn of the 20th century. This is a provocative thesis because the credit has always gone to the University of Chicago and Robert Park, a white sociologist who taught there. Du Bois produced the first scientific school of modern sociology, Morris said. He was into data collection, census data, survey data, interview data, ethnographic data. He did it all. Pulling from over a decade of research and primary resources, such as personal letters, conference proceedings, and scholarly writings, the scholar denied argues that power, money, politics, and the ideology of white supremacy led to Du Bois being written out of the founding of sociology. Moreover, his intellectual breakthroughs were marginalized in the field of sociology for the last century. However, an earlier feminist, some of Du Bois' most introspective, poignant, and important works are those dealing not only with the question of the color line, but with the woman's true place in society. One of the leading pioneers of the civil rights movement, Du Bois was born in Great Barrington, Massachusetts on February the 23rd, 1868. He grew up in an environment of intellectuals. Thus, he witnessed few displays of Jim Crowism. A talented student, Du Bois excelled academically in high school. Upon graduation, he hoped to attend Harvard or Yale. However, due to a lack of funds, he traveled south to Tennessee, enrolling at Nashville's Fisk University in 1885. During his tenure at Fisk, he juggled several extracurricular activities, including editor of the college newspaper and a rigorous academic curriculum. In fact, Du Bois graduated in 3 years. His interest in the newspaper business would continue, influencing him to edit The Crisis for the NAACP in his later years. At Fisk, Du Bois also received his first exposure to the segregated South. He spent his summers teaching community schools, learning firsthand about the pervasive poverty, discrimination, and prejudice that faced young blacks in Tennessee. It was at Fisk that he began analyzing the deep troubles of American racism. In May 1888, he graduated from Fisk University. During his matriculation at Nashville's oldest institution of higher learning, he resolved to challenge the color bar and work diligently to bring down the walls of Jim Crow. In the fall, he entered Harvard Graduate School. While attending Harvard, he was not allowed on campus after 6 p.m. In 1895, Du Bois became the first African American to earn a PhD from Harvard University. 4 years after earning his degree, Du Bois published his landmark study, The Philadelphia Negro, a social study, in 1899. It was the first case study of an African American community in the United States. This work marked the beginning of his expansive writing career. In Philadelphia, he found numerous health issues relating to poverty, high infant mortality, and prostitution, among other ills. However, while not completely excusing the African American community, his analysis pointed to the pervasiveness of racism. In the study, he coined the phrase, the talented 10th, a term that described the likelihood of 1 in 10 men becoming leaders of their race. While working as a professor at Atlanta University, Du Bois rose to national prominence when he publicly opposed Booker T. Washington's 1895 Atlanta Compromise, an agreement that asserted vocational education for African Americans was more valuable to them than social advantages like higher education or political office. Du Bois criticized Washington for not demanding equality for African Americans as granted by the 14th Amendment. In 1903, he published his seminal work, The Souls of Black Folk, a collection of 14 essays containing poetry, autobiographical sketches, historical articles, and memoirs. Souls of Black Folks is a response to Booker T. Washington's 1901 Up from Slavery. Still widely read, Souls is a wide-ranging representation of the African American experience. Du Bois felt that Washington's ideas sustained the ethos of Jim Crow America, an America that promoted second-class citizenship for African Americans in every aspect of their lives. In the years following, he adamantly opposed the idea of biological white superiority and vocally supported women's rights. During the first decade of the 20th century, Du Bois founded the Niagara Movement and was a co-founder of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Later, he served as editor of the NAACP's The Crisis. He was one of the first advocates, if not the first, to use academic knowledge in the service of civil rights and social change. With his PhD dissertation, he took on the entire edifice of sociology and the social scientific community, pointing out the mythological fallacies about the African American community. He fought what he believed was an inferior strategy, subsequently becoming a spokesperson for full and equal rights in every realm of a person's life. Like Frederick Douglass before him, Du Bois was keenly interested in women's suffrage and the status of women, not only because he saw instructive parallels between the oppression of women and that of African Americans, but also because he was distressed by the effects of the scourge of sexism and racism on African American women. What is the role of the white feminist whom Du Bois was reading in shaping his understanding of the woman question? He is very critical of the racism in the movement for women's suffrage, and much later Black feminists would be critical of the same in the feminist movement of the 1960s and 70s. In his sociological studies, his political polemic, his philosophical reflections, and the prophetic romances of his fiction, he sought to portray and understand the special sufferings and heroism of women of color. Du Bois represents a scholar of the utmost repute and relevance, regardless of race, creed, and nationality. For some, he seems to offer an inclusive project of liberation and thus exists as a model for contemporary racial and feminist liberatory movements. In fact, Du Bois is often heralded in the secondary literature as an early womanist or feminist. Subtle yet poignant manifestations of Du Boisian feminism are evident in his fictional works. Celebrated as an authentic academician, within his novels, The Quest of the Silver Fleece and Dark Princes, the reader is aware of the role and importance of women. The reader gets a glimpse not only in and through the writer's boundless imagination, but also in Du Bois' portrayal of female characters, such as Zora in The Quest of the Silver Fleece, and their cultural and ultimate roles within these works. In addition to his novels, his multitudinal creative writing pieces, such as The Burden of Black Women, he shows the creative espousal of his feminist thought. He lamented the burden of Black women in The Horizon, Voice of the Negro, The Independent, and in his first autobiographical book, Dark Water. During his tenure as editor of The Crisis, Du Bois wrote more than 20 essays on women's suffrage, published a special women's suffrage number of the periodical in September 1912, and sponsored a Votes for Women symposium in the August 1915. He delivered a speech on suffrage at the annual convention of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, which the association later published as a book. Du Bois also corresponded with several influential suffragists, including Mary Church Terrell, Ida B. Wells, and Jane Addams. He examines the female role regardless of race in society and ultimately becomes a proponent of women's rights. In his most powerful feminist work, the 1920 essay, The Damnation of Women, Du Bois attests the uplift of women is next to the problem of the color line and the peace movement, our greatest modern cause. When now two of these movements, women and color, combine in one, the combination has a deep meaning. Du Bois' arguments on behalf of African American women are most apparent in 4 works. The poem, The Burden of the Black Women, 1907, Essays of the Black Mother, 1912, Hail Columbia, 1913, and The Damnation of Black Women, 1920. He opens The Damnation of Women with a description of 4 women of his boyhood: his widowed mother, his cousin Inez, Emma, the victim of sexual double standard, and Ida Fuller, the outcast. These 4 women represent the limitations American society places on women when denying them social, political, and economic freedom. Of them, he writes, "They existed not for themselves, but for men. They were named after the men to whom they related and not after the fashion of their own souls." Darkwater, Voices from Within the Veil, is a literary work by W. Du Bois, published in 1920. The text incorporates autobiographical information as well as spirituals and poems that were all written by Du Bois himself. Written when he was 50, Darkwater is the first of Du Bois's 3 autobiographies and was followed by Dusk of Dawn, an autobiography of a race concept, and the autobiography of W.B. Du Bois, a soliloquy of viewing my life from the last decade of its first century. In his chapter, The Damnation of Women, Du Bois seeks to elevate women by acknowledging their labor in the home, the workplace, and the Black church. The chapter has been described as one of the first proto-feminist analysis by a male intellectual. In the chapter, Du Bois gives the Black mother even more glorification for her role as a childbearer. He calls for women to seek a life of economic independence and argues that women have a right to control their own bodies and reproductive choices, a right that is very much prevalent today. Yet, in his description of women, he often describes their physical traits first, such as his description of journalist Mary Shedd Carey, whom he described as a, quote, ravishing dream-born beauty. Du Bois launches a critique of inhibitions to the development of women's intellect and leadership. Only at the sacrifice of intelligence and the chance to do their best work can the majority of modern women bear children. This is the damnation of women. All womanhood is hampered today because the world on which it is emerging is a world that tries to worship both virgins and mothers, and in the end despises motherhood and despoils virgins. That was Du Bois' earliest statement. This statement holds within it the seeds of what emerges decades later as a feminist politic. Women must have access to educational and economic opportunity, free of their relationships to their husbands, fathers, and brothers. Interesting, where others have found the seeds of an emasculating Black matriarchy, Du Bois applauds the emergence of economically independent Black women. Furthermore, he asserts the necessity of women's control over their reproduction. He writes, "Not by guarding the weak in weakness do we gain strength, but by making weakness free and strong. This is a progressive stance on Black women to emerge from the pen of a Black man since Frederick Douglass. It echoes the demands of feminists such as Anna Julia Cooper and Margaret Sanger. In fact, it is doubtful that even Black women thinkers were as explicit in their demands. For the most part, it is only in the context of veiled allusions in their fiction that Black women writers and thinkers of the time approached any discussion of sexuality and birth control. Bettina Apthecker's 1982 Women's Legacy, Essays on Race, Sex, and Class in American History points out that Du Bois felt that African Americans would not see their civil rights bestowed without the same happening for women. He proposed it this way: what is today the message of these Black women to the American world? The uplift of women is next to the problem of the color line and the peace movement, our greatest martyrs' cause. Du Bois is expressing a similar understanding of the intersections of systems of oppression that Black feminists have drawn to our attention almost a century later. For the most part, Black feminist intellectuals acknowledge Du Bois' sexism in his personal life, especially his treatment of his daughter, but many of them also applaud his efforts on behalf of Black women and claim him as an intellectual ancestor. African-American feminist scholar Beverly Guy Sheftall, the Anna Julia Cooper Professor of Women's Studies and English at Spelman College, named Du Bois as one of the founding parents of the discipline of Black women's studies. She takes the title of her study, Daughters of Sorrow, from the Du Bois essay, The Damnation of Women, to situate him in the context of his time. Guy Sheftall cites Du Bois' fight with Monroe Trotter over admitting women into the Niagara movement and notes that he later helped to organize the Women's Auxiliary. She does recognize Du Bois' idealized image of Black women, much in the same way that Southern white men paid homage to the shrine of womanhood. This ideal image reveals the extent to which Black men subscribe to the notion that since women are the weaker sex, they must be protected by their men from the evils of the world. Claudia Tate, who was a noted literary critic and professor of English and African American Studies at Princeton, noted in her psychoanalysis in Black novels, also notes that Du Bois was an exception among Black intellectuals. There is a counter-narrative to the Du Boisian feminism in Transcending the Talented Tenth, Black Leaders and American Intellectuals. Joy James, who is a professor of humanities and political science at Williams College, provides a framework for understanding Du Bois' pro-feminism as well as his masculinism. Here is one of the most complex analyses of Du Bois' gender politics. Since masculinism does not explicitly advocate male superiority to rigid gender roles, it is not identical to patriarchal ideology. Masculinism can share patriarch's presupposition of the male as normative without anti-female politics and rhetoric. James explains that without misogynistic dogma, Du Bois naturalized Black male intellectual dominance. At the same time that he advocated for women's rights, he veiled the individual achievements of such women as Anna Julia Cooper and Ida B. Wells Barnett from the political landscape. Furthermore, Du Bois had troublesome relationships with independent Black women activists. Black British critic Hazel Carby extends James' critique in Race Men. Carby initiates an extended critical discussion of the work of Black male artists and intellectuals, and she points the ways that the Black intellectual tradition has been constructed as masculine. She argues that Du Bois' complete failure to imagine Black women as intellectuals and race leaders, his failure to incorporate Black women into the sphere of intellectual equality, is not merely the result of sexism of Du Bois' historical moment, it is a conceptual and political failure of imagination that represented a characteristic of work of contemporary African American male intellectuals. W.B. Du Bois died on August 27, 1963, one day before Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his "I Have a Dream for Freedom and Jobs" speech at Washington. Du Bois died at the age of 95 in Ghana while he was working on an encyclopedia of the African diaspora. Upon hearing of his death, Dr. Martin Luther King said, and I quote, "History cannot ignore W.B. Du Bois because history has to reflect truth. And Du Bois was a tireless explorer and gifted discoverer of social truths." Du Bois was interested in the status of women, not only because he saw instructive parallels between the oppression of women and that of African Americans, but also because he was distressed by the effects of the double scourge of sexism and racism on African American women. In his sociological studies, his political polemic, his philosophical reflections, and the prophetic romances of his fiction, he sought to portray and understand the special sufferings and heroism of women of color. Thank you. You can tell I've been doing this for 35 years because I forgot to do something. Earlier, when I introduced the staff of the Historical Commission and the Executive Director, I failed to introduce the chair of the Tennessee Historical Commission, which is Dr. Revis L. Mitchell.
20 years ago, late Dr. William Pearson said, "You know, we need some courses on women's history here at Fisk." And I said, "I'm not going to teach them." He said, "We need Linda Wynn." Well, she's been with us 20 years, and we certainly need her, and the need is certainly there. This morning, I'm going to take privilege now, a new category to be introduced. That's friends of the co-chairs. That's those individuals who have to hear these papers, who have to ask the question, did I pronounce that right? How you spell that? What you talking about? So I'm gonna get the prerogative to introduce a friend, special friends of the co-chairs. First, I'm going to introduce Professor Wynn's special friend. I'm going to ask her to stand up and wave at a friend of the conference, her mother, Mrs. Frances Thompson. Ms. Frances, you up there? And I'm going to try to recoup Valentine's Day now by introducing my special friend, Dr. Patricia Walker Mitchell. Pat, stand up and wave. It must have been 35 or 36 years ago. All right.
Let me do this.
All right, come on.
We do this every year. We always introduce my mother, but I would also like to introduce my cousin, Marion McDonald, who brings my mother to this conference every year. So I would like for her to stand because she certainly helps me out in making sure that she gets here. Thank you.
All right. You got a few more pronunciations coming now. All right, all right. 36 or 37 years ago, I wasn't there, but Dr. Bobby Lovett, Linda Wynn, and Maydeen Eberling hatched the idea of Nashville having a conference on African American history. And it's really a pleasure to see all of you now. In looking at the celebration this year, I think things have diminished. I see banks sponsoring celebrities to read a little line on TV, not full discussion and airing of topics like we've done today. Very few TV shows today, public service shows, look at this. So this conference is vitally important. It's important as it was 36 or 37 years ago when they planned the first one. Dr. Lovett and Linda, they also look for sponsorship, and we've been constant because for the last 35 years, we've been sponsored by Tennessee State University and by Metropolitan Nashville and the government here in Nashville. And each of these years, we've been pleased to have remarks by the two sponsoring agencies. This morning, representing Tennessee State University, bringing remarks will be Dr. DeMark Hardy, Vice President for Academic Affairs. Dr. Hardy, see, come on down.
Good morning. Oh my goodness, this is a very, very exciting day for me to be able to come down and to interact with you all here at this very, very special conference. I'd like to bring greetings on behalf of our President Glenda Glover, who because of travel really couldn't be here today, but she knew about the conference and definitely wanted you all to know that we're excited about the fact that you've chosen to be here again this year. I'd like to also recognize our Dean, Dean Gloria Johnson, who works very closely with me and in her role as it relates to putting on this conference as well. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience. Please know that Tennessee State has a rich history. I'm sorry. Tennessee State has a rich history as it relates to educating people of color and, in fact, a diverse population now. It's probably one of the most diverse HBCUs in the country. But the fact that you all are talking about African American culture and history is so important, because one of the things you always hear, and that is, if you don't remember your history, right, you are likely to forget it and then make mistakes because you just don't know exactly what happened in the past. So it's so important that we continue to look at that, to record it, and to explore it, and also to investigate what has happened in the past. So we really appreciate you coming. And take advantage of the opportunity to see a little bit more about Tennessee State while you're here. I'm not so sure if anyone is here for the first time, but if you are, please know that we have another campus outside of this campus, a little bit to the north of here. And so we really invite you to take an opportunity to go over and see that campus as well. We also want to invite you to really enjoy the experience that you're having today here. It's a lot of information that's being shared, and I really think that from this conference you can go back to your various places and again share that with your constituencies, and it's going to be important that we do that. So again, thank you for coming. I'm the Vice President for Academic Affairs. I'm responsible for what happens on the academic side of the house. But this is a rich experience just for me, because although I'm a biologist by training, I'm interested in history. Anytime something comes on the History Channel, I'm always watching it because I'm just fascinated by that. So I'm going to be here today as an active learner myself. So again, thank you all for inviting me, and we hope you have a very, very productive day.
Thank you for coming, Mr. Vice President. Today, the city of Nashville will be represented by the Director of the Mayor's Office on Neighborhoods and Community Engagement. We're always great to have a greeting from the Mayor's Office, and today that greeting will be provided by the Honorable Lionel Matthews. Director, Mr. Matthews.
Good morning. It's good to see you all here this morning, and on behalf of Mayor Megan Berry, I bring you greetings from the city of Nashville. Definitely want to say that the mayor wants to continue to be supportive of this conference and those that helped to pull this together. I do see Representative Brenda Gilmore is in the audience, and Councilman Freddie O'Connell, and I'm not sure if there are any other elected officials, but on behalf of Nashville, the mayor is very committed to the African American community and making sure that our character, history, and culture, it has a strong foundation to continue to build and become stronger within the city of Nashville. I do want to take this opportunity to talk about a term that I have seen used more frequently in recent times, and that's the term unapologetically. And if you could say that with me, unapologetically. Some have started to use the term, and they add the term black at the end of it. Unapologetically black. And it almost has become synonymous with the term or the movement of black pride. But it implies the notion that African Americans, that some African Americans feel that they have to apologize for being who they are. And they don't. When African Americans, you can clap to that. Now, my wife Jahar is a big fan, and when I saw Sister Beyonce this past weekend at the Super Bowl, stand in formation with her background dancers dressed in replica Black Panther attire, it was an unapologetically black moment. And as I think about Sister Beyonce, I was a student at Tennessee State University, and this is home for me. When I heard the rumors that she was actually down the street looking at Fisk University when she was choosing the university that she was going to attend, because her father, Matthew Knowles, had attended Fisk University. And as we celebrate 150 years of Fisk University, although Sister Beyonce wasn't part of that history, there's a rich history of W.E.B. Du Bois, Ida B. Wells, Nikki Giovanni, Representative John Lewis, even to Kim Whitley, or the most recent, one of the most recent valedictorians at Fisk, Melissa Jean Marie Garcia. And as we think about that history and that long lineage, and we celebrate 150 years of Fisk University and what they've contributed to Nashville, to this community, but to the world, we have to remember that we can be unapologetically black. And so when I think about the mayor and being able to stand on her behalf, I always go back to her priorities. And when she talks about issues like affordable housing, when she talks about issues like workforce, or when she even talks about issues like youth violence, she makes the statement that these issues affect all of us. But one thing that she always says is, make no mistake about it, these issues disproportionately affect African Americans the most. So I say that to say that we do have to remember our history, or we may be doomed to repeat it. But as we move forward as a city, Let's continue to embrace everyone. Let's continue to be unapologetic with our embrace of diversity in this city and our differences. And let's continue to remember that as all lives matter, Black lives matter too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews. I think this young man bears watching. I believe he has a future in politics. It is an honor to present the chair of the Tennessee Black Caucus of Legislators and the state representative, the Honorable Brenda Gilmore.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Brenda Gilmore, and I am honored to be here and to be a part of this wonderful conference. I make this announcement of this resolution on behalf of the Governor of this great state of Tennessee, the 109th General Assembly, and Representative Harold Love and myself. And if there are any other elected officials in the audience that would like to stand with me as I present it, I welcome you. Former Councilman Matthews, if you'd like to come back. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Okay, so we make this resolution. I won't read the entire resolution honoring 150 years anniversary of Fifth University, but as it's been said this morning, some of the history is just so fascinating and amazing. I would like to read a few of the standards. A resolution commemorating the 105th anniversary of Fisk University, whereas one of the 6 sisters African American colleges founded and supported by the American Missionary Association, Fisk School, or Fisk Free Colored School, began its long and storied history on January 9, 1866, just 6 months after the end of the Civil War and 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, due to the vision, financial generosity, and hard work of John Ogden. Did I pronounce that correctly? Okay. The Reverend Milo Kravitz and the Reverend Edward P. Smith. And whereas speeches were delivered by General Clinton Bowen Fisk, United States Army Chief Chaplain and leader of the American Missionary Association in Tennessee and head of Tennessee and Kentucky Freedmen's Bureau, from whom the school is named. And whereas after the Tennessee General Assembly passed legislation providing for free primary public education in the state, Fisk changed the focal point of its mission to higher education and was rechartered and incorporated as Fisk University on August 22, 1867. And whereas 150 years later, the dreams of Fisk founders have been realized far beyond their expectations. In 1873, Fisk relocated to its present site and developed its first-class liberal arts institution. Whereas Fisk University is home to the world-famous Fisk Jubilee Singers, who have brought international acclaim to the prestigious university and whose first members performed for historical figures such as Mark Twain, President Ulysses Grant, Johann Strauss, and Queen Victoria. And whereas the group was originally formed to raise funds for the then struggling Fisk University, the Jubilee Singers accomplished their goal and raised enough money to build Jubilee Hall, the first permanent structure in the South for the education of Black students, and one of the 27 buildings in Tennessee recognized as a National Historical Landmark. And whereas faculty and alumni have been among America's intellectual, artists, and civic leaders in every generation since the school's founding, and include the co-founder of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, whom we just heard about, Dr. W.E. Du Bois, notable artists Aaron Douglas, Percy Lavon Julian, the first African-American chemist, and award-winning author Nikki Giovanni. And whereas today, FISC continues to play a central role in shaping of young Black minds become tomorrow's leaders. And it's on this occasion that the General Assembly wishes to honor the administration, faculty, staff, and alumni, and students of Fisk University for their ongoing commitment to academic excellence in the African American community. And it's resolved again in the 109th General Assembly. And again, I would just say that I'm very honored to be a part of this resolution, and I would implore everyone in the audience and this entire community that Fisk University and Tennessee State University are two wonderful jewels in our community, and we must do everything that we can to make sure that they are sustained, and that 150 years from now, that our children will be celebrating Fisk University and Tennessee State University. Thank you. Thank you.
Representative Gilmore, on behalf of 250,000 alumni of Fisk University, the 850 students presently studying at Fisk University, the distinguished faculty and staff, on behalf of Mr. Frank Sims, the interim president of Fisk University, and Barbara Landers Bowles, a Nashvilleian, a graduate of Pearl High School, a daughter of Fisk University, and chair of the Fisk University Board of Trustees. I accept this proclamation.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Remus. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. I want us to move out here. She wants to take a photo. Come on up here.
Cultural conference in a celebration of Fisk University's sesquicentennial, and we're going to continue in the second half, paying tribute and honor to the legacy of Fisk University, not only in this community, but globally, in the things that they have produced, not only as students, but as faculty and those associated with the university. I hope everyone is in for lunch. We appreciate that wonderful annual lunch we always have. I think they kicked it up a little notch this year. Very good food service here at TSU. This morning they did recognize the committee, planning committee, and financial supporters and others. I'm not going to take up time with that, but do look at that information on your brochure, and thank you again for coming to the conference, and we appreciate your annual support, and those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. And I don't think anything was said this morning to welcome any and congratulate any of you in the audience who are Fiskites. Are there any Fiskites among us? All right, yay, wonderful. I'm not a Fiskite, but my family is certainly associated with Fisk University over the years. So we're going to get started. The second half, we will continue with the musical legacy of Fisk University, as well as its international connections. We'll start our first presentation with Don Cusack. He is a Curb Professor of Music, Industrial History at Belmont University. He is the author of 26 books, including James Weldon Johnson, which is his presentation this afternoon. He is a songwriter. Excuse me, the book is James Weldon Johnson, Songwriter in the Trials of Henry Flipper, the first Black graduate of West Point. Cusick and Mike Kerr helped to produce an album by James Weldon Johnson, which was sung by none other than Melinda Doolittle. You may remember her from American Idol. Okay. And he has written other books of the Beatles and country music, Saved by Song, A History of Gospel and Christian Music, and the biographies of Eddie Arnold, Roger Miller, and Gene Autry. Give him a warm welcome.
You know, Abraham Lincoln's birthday used to be February 12th. It is now the third Monday in February, along with all the other presidents. But the very first public performance of Lift Every Voice was on Lincoln's birthday in 1900. So it's on this date, 116 years ago, that Lift Every Voice was first performed publicly. I'm here to talk about James Weldon Johnson as a teacher and his connection to Fisk. And when I was doing research on the book on James Weldon Johnson, songwriter, I went to Yale. Yale is where most of his papers are. And I was surprised, after I finished, because they've got boxes of stuff on it, I was surprised after I finished looking at the music that he had typed up, or someone had typed up, all of these lectures that he gave at Fisk, or at least some of them, most of them. And that intrigued me, so I made copies of those lectures. I also interviewed Dr. Collins, and some of the former Fisk students had told me about Dr. Collins, and they warned me that he was very old school. And so I called him and I made an appointment with him and to talk about James Weldon Johnson. And we met at the Fisk Library. And I brought in a tape recorder and I said, I hope you don't mind me taping this. And he says, I'm not talking into that contraption. So as soon as I finished, we talked for about an hour. As soon as I finished, I made some notes. I rushed back to my office and wrote down as much as I could remember. Dr. Collins told me he used to go to New York to see Broadway shows, and that's how he met James Weldon Johnson. Dr. Collins clearly idolized Johnson and thought he was a great man. He didn't have much to say kindly about Mrs. Johnson. I kept prodding him, and finally he just says she was kind of snobbish. So that was his take on her. A little background: during 1931, Fisk President Thomas Jones arranged for Johnson to be a visiting professor at Fisk. That agreement stated that Johnson would receive $5,000 and that Fisk would build a house for Johnson to live in. And that house is still standing on the Fisk campus with a Metro Historical marker in front of it. Johnson taught at Fisk during the winter and spring each year, or from January to June. At that time, Fisk had about 500 students and about 40 faculty instructors. It was a prestigious elite university for African Americans. It remains so today. In June, Johnson would return to New York, where he remained active in the social and cultural life there. During the summers, he had a home in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. And during his time at Fisk, he often took speaking engagements at other universities or other places. Dr. Jones wanted Fisk to be the Harvard of black education, black universities. And during that time, Fisk had some notable scholars there, including John Work, that we talked about earlier. I won't go into an extensive biography of Johnson, that would take days. But he had been a leading figure in the Harlem former executive secretary, first black secretary of the NAACP. Just prior to Johnson's arrival, he had finished his book, Black Manhattan, and during his time at Fisk, he wrote his autobiography along this way. On January 5th, 1932, James Weldon Johnson began teaching at Fisk. One of the courses Johnson taught was The Negro in American Literature. Johnson lectured in this course, and then junior members of the department held discussion groups, doing most of the work of the testing and the academic advising and grading papers. He also taught creative writing, and for that course, he spent a lot of time reading papers. In general, Johnson's lectures emphasized 20th century writers, adhering rather closely to the syllabus outlined by his friend Carl Van Doren in American and British literature since 1890. Although Johnson added Ernest Hemingway, E.E. Cummings, and Thomas Wolfe in his course. He also talked about writers from the Harlem Renaissance, especially the poet Paul Laurence Dunbar and Charles Chesnutt. John Hope Franklin, who was a student at Fisk when Johnson taught, remembered that, as a whole, the students were disappointed with the meager effects of Johnson's presence on campus. Franklin described Johnson as an impeccably dressed, imposing man who maintained a suitable distance between himself and his students. Johnson was a very formal man. He, again, kept a distance there. There was an informal discussion debate group, the Wranglers, where at regular intervals a small number of students, faculty, and administrators would gather to discuss current affairs or simply exchange stories of common interest. Johnson took an active role in those conversations. Relaxing in an easy chair, he would tell of his life on Broadway or in Latin America and his days as executive secretary for the NAACP. Johnson was not a wealthy man. His Fisk salary did not cover his living expenses. He also, this was the Great Depression, and his books were not selling as well. He was helping family and friends, and so those outside speaking engagements helped him to make ends meet. Beginning in the fall of 1934, Johnson also taught at New York University's School of Education as a visiting professor of literature. His courses there were on black literature and the contribution of the race to American culture. James Weldon Johnson gave talks at Fisk on a wide variety of topics, everything from world affairs to creative writing. Instead of giving you a list of those, I'd like to read from one of those talks he gave to students about their future. I have edited it out quite a bit. Johnson would bring me talk for about an hour. And they won't let me do that here. But this is an edited version of what he told students. His talk was one of his morning talks. He had a series of morning talks, and the topic was life, art, and literatures. And this one comes from January 23rd, 1935. He says, "Talking to public audiences is one of my professions, one that I have practiced for a good many years. Contrary to what most people think, it is not a very difficult profession. The public speaker of long practice, simply by opening his mouth, sets in motion the word-producing machinery, and string after string of words pour out. Frequently, he finds it easier to start the machinery than to stop it. Unfortunately, it also frequently happens that he fails to coordinate the word-producing machinery with the idea-producing machinery. So we often get from a public speaker only string after string of words. In these talks, your speaker would use every effort to keep the word-producing machinery linked with the idea-producing machinery. A speech addressed to adults never gives me much concern. Perhaps because I feel that it doesn't make quite so much difference what one says to grown-ups, that probably nothing one says will change them in any marked degree. They are already set in their ways. But with those still in the plastic years, there is at least a chance that a word or a thought uttered may have some effect on the shaping of a life. so I'm always a bit awed before the inquiring gaze of youth. It is a feat when one of an older generation is able, if only for a moment, to place himself in rapport with youth. It is a feat and not an easy one. And that is why most of us grow intellectually and emotionally old. We live and die with our generation. Only a few are able to recall the dreams of their own youth. And through these fading dreams, divine and interpret the dreams of youth around and about them. And so remain young. That's how old fogies are produced. Without taking the dark, despairing view of life, we are nevertheless forced to realize that it is a stern, serious, arduous undertaking. That is, the life that is well lived. But withal, it has its compensations. Its rewards and victories and triumphs come, however, through surmounting the obstacle and overcoming the handicaps. What I want you primarily to get out of this talk this morning is something that may be practically applied to your present relation to life, and that is the relation of students in college. The total value of what I shall say rests in its applicability to life as life affects you. It is risky to do it, but I think I may risk the following as one of these definitions of life. It is the endless effort to make a favorable adjustment between internal strivings and external conditions. We may risk another definition and say that the secret of life, then, consists in the acquisition and possession of the power of control to dominate, to conquer the environment. I look into your faces as you are gathered here, and I try to divine what is going on behind your faces. I mean the upper part of your faces. I should like to be able to peek through the veil and see what you are thinking about what I am saying, but I cannot be too sure. Certainly I know that college students do a good deal of thinking about success in life. Going through college is in a large measure a quest for the golden key, an effort to obtain the open sesame. A large part of this is merely wishful thinking. I should like to have you, if you have not already done so, take some fundamental steps in the sound, constructive thinking that will lead to the desired goal. As a primary step, I should like each of you to spend a portion of your thoughtful moments in casting your physical and mental balance with Fisk University. In making a review and trying to determine where you stand today in relation to where you stopped a year or 6 months ago. In striving to reach a conclusion as to whether you have gone forward or slipped backward. For if you have not gone forward, you have actually slipped back. Now, what I wish to impress upon you at this moment is this question. Have these thoughts concerned you? If you have endeavored to think them through clearly and have been able to reach a conclusion, well and good. If these matters have been of no concern to you, the probabilities are that they never will be. If they have been, the probabilities are that they always will be. It is on these probabilities that I should base my prognostications. I trust that you understand that in calling upon you for this review, I am referring to more than your scholarship record. It is quite conceivable that a student may make the necessary marks to graduate from this or any other institution without giving much serious thought to life, to what it might mean for him or for her. Such a student needs to learn that graduating from college may signify a great deal or may signify very little. There is nothing magical about a piece of parchment with the word diploma engraved upon it. The young man or young woman who is thoughtless and irresponsible about fundamentals on the day before receiving a diploma will not be serious and purposeful about them the following day. What I am striving to bring home to you is the fact that the deepest meaning of education in an institution like Fisk University is not in a demonstration of mere scholarship. As desirable as that is, not in the mere acquisition of facts, as useful as those facts might be. It is in the development of the highest possible degree of physical and mental control. In the measure in which you gain that, you will, in the same measure, have gained a mastery of the forces that enter into controlling, dominating, and conquering environment. If you have not gained it in any degree, you are completely at the mercy of those forces and of your environment. And mere education only makes your situation more pathetic. Let us briefly consider these two controls. We are, to begin with, animals with animal appetites and animal traits. We must have control of those appetites and traits and not be ruled by them. That is the foundation upon which all higher developments are reared. Intellectual as well as moral strength and growth depend on having that control. In the process of getting an education, we acquire a good many facts and a considerable amount of information which are bunched together under the general denomination of knowledge. This that we call knowledge, however, is not the essence of education. In fact, it is of value only if in the acquisition of it we have also acquired mental control. We may lose, as we likely shall, most of this knowledge. We may forget how to solve a problem in mathematics or physics, the date on which King John signed the Magna Carta, how to construe or translate a passage in Latin or Greek. Tells you what college was like back then. And what the formula are for various chemical compounds. But we are not one whit the worse off. In getting an education, we gained mental control. And mental control is something that is not subject to being forgotten. With the proper degree of mental control, all the known facts in the universe are available to you whenever you need or want them. And there is no necessity of carrying around what can only be a limited portion of them cluttered up in your head. Mental control does not consist of remembering facts. It consists in the power to verify, classify, and correlate facts, and the ability to arrive at a true result, and the ability not only to recognize but to discover facts. In a word, mental control means that the mind has been developed into an efficient instrument and not converted into a filing cabinet. Discipline is absolutely essential, and discipline means long, arduous, systematic work. Discipline is a term which in these days has fallen largely into disrepute. Modern methods have tried to get away from it. By discipline, I do not mean the rod and rigid rules. I am urging you to self-discipline. Sad to say, however, self-discipline in too many instances depends upon a degree of external discipline. Disciplining the mind is no greater mystery than disciplining the body, but it requires more tenacity of purpose. For the mind is a lazy, tricky truant. Sometimes we think it is on the job. We even think that we see it there. But it has slipped away. It is not there. It is off somewhere loafing and playing. Listen! At this very moment, some of you think you are paying attention to what I am saying. But will, on examination, find that the mind is dozing or loitering around the room or has flown out the window. The truant must time after time be caught by the scruff of the neck and put back to work. The mind is disciplined by being given tasks in thinking, in original thinking, in thinking things through. Let the beginner experiment and he will be amazed at how little actual thinking he can do. In the effort to think a thing through, the mind will grow fatigued. It will balk. It will sulk. It must constantly be brought back and started anew on the task. Remember that through life you do your own thinking, or your thinking is done for you. And the latter is a very expensive service. One more practical suggestion. Solitude has an important relation to the acquisition of mental control. It is next to impossible to master the art of thinking in a crowd. Perhaps people who simply can't get along without company are probably people who get along without thinking. One who wishes to be a thinker, to possess mental control, must learn to spend some portion of each day in solitude, in company with himself alone, in companionship with his own thoughts. If you make this a rule of life and follow it consistently, you will find yourself able to tap the deepest resources of your mind and soul. If, in the time you spend here, you gain physical and mental control, you will have balanced your account with Fisk University. You will have canceled all the debt incurred in your coming to this institution. You will also have fitted yourself to take hold on the forces of life, and in a greater or less measure, directed them toward the goal you have set. And in acquiring physical and mental control, you will have done even more. You will have come into possession of the key to the inner life. And the key to the inner life is the supreme possession. Well, that was from a talk from James Weldon Johnson, and I've got a couple of oh, I'm over time. Okay, very quickly. This is a picture of him and his wife. This is a picture of him in his house teaching students. This is a picture of him teaching in the classroom. This is a picture of him in his house. Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you, Professor Kuzik. We appreciate that. Those of you who've been around a while, coming to the conferences, I was beginning to feel like Ms. McDougal, easing up on the stage, not to want to interrupt a fine presentation. Thank you so much for sharing that information with us. Gives us a lot to think about. Our next presentation is Fletcher F. Moon. He's a tenured associate professor and head reference librarian at Tennessee State University. And he has served in that capacity since 1983. He is a graduate of Fisk University as well as Peabody College of Vanderbilt University. And he has held several positions that have to do with library service, such as library assistance and special collections at Fisk University. He has been pretty much a Renaissance person in terms of the proposals that he has written and grants from received from the National Endowment of Humanities and others. You can find his writing and research in a number of books and journals that have been published. He is a in music composition, production, performance, public relations, television, ministry, etc., etc., etc. And so now we present to you Mr. Fletcher Moon, Professor Moon, in the sophisticated, ladies and gentlemen, highlights of Fisk tradition and instrumental music.
right into my slides, and we'll just kind of move this as quickly as possible. Obviously, the first slide you see is of Jubilee Hall, which is considered frozen music, a tribute to this wonderful tradition in music. I'm going to focus on another aspect that a lot of people generally kind of don't think of automatically when you think of Fisk University. We all know about the Jubilee Singers. As a matter of fact, obviously you've experienced the current Jubilee Singers, but I wanted to kind of look at another aspect of it. So I'm focusing on the instrumental music tradition. And that obviously begins with Ella Shepherd Moore. Not only was she instrumental in the development of the original Fisk Jubilee Singers, but for all intents and purposes, she is Fisk's first African American faculty member and Fisk's first musician. In the famous portrait, the Edmund Howell portrait of the singers who went to Europe and sang before Queen Victoria, you see Ella Shepherd seated at the piano. In most of the historical photographs of Ella Shepherd, she's seated at a piano and in some instances at an organ. She was a very accomplished pianist, keyboardist, as we would say in today's lingo. And I'll just kind of go to some prepared remarks just a little bit about Ella Shepherd. She was a formerly enslaved woman whose freedom was purchased by her father, Simon, for $350. She overcame childhood traumas, including her mother, Sarah, being sold south to Mississippi. And she fled Nashville with her father and other family members to Cincinnati to avoid possible re-enslavement. Despite early health problems, she studied music in a local black school and showed such talent that her father bought her a piano before his sudden death in 1866, which happens to be the same year that Fisk University was founded. Shepherd continued her piano training with secret instruction from a white Cincinnati teacher. She played for local functions, began training a few students of her own, and also managed to earn money from domestic work before returning to Tennessee to teach school in Gallatin, less than 50 miles from Nashville. She saved a small amount and enrolled at Fisk in the fall of 1868 to study and support herself by working in the campus dining room and giving music lessons to other students. During her first summers at Fisk, she became an assistant music teacher and the school's first faculty member, as I already stated. But the school was already struggling to the point that closure was being considered. As an earlier speaker mentioned, George L. White came up with the idea to organize a group of student singers to go out and attempt to raise funds for the school. And he recruited Shepherd to serve as pianist and vocal trainer, as well as sing soprano. The group's first performances, as you've heard from Dr. Mitchell earlier, were actually in southern cities with very limited success, which is probably why the Fisk administration didn't encourage White to continue his efforts with a northern tour. Nevertheless, the accounts indicate that White gathered and borrowed funds and on October 6, 1871, set out to, quote, sing the money out of the hearts and pockets of the people. The original company of 9 singers included 4 other women besides Shepherd: Jenny Jackson, Maggie Porter, Minnie Tate, and Eliza Walker, and 4 men: Isaac Dickerson, Benjamin Holmes, Green Evans, and Thomas Rutledge. Because of the success of the original Jubilee Singers, very few continued or completed their education at Fisk. America W. Robinson was the only early Fisk Jubilee singer to actually receive a Fisk degree. She graduated in the first graduating class. This is Jenny W. Robinson. Because and unavailable to continue her role as a music teacher or music faculty member, the early Fisk administration decided they needed to organize a music department. So in 1885, Jenny W. Robinson became Fisk's first music department head. She was a graduate of Oberlin, and Fisk President Cravath also had Oberlin connections, so that was the reason or the connection that led to her coming to Fisk as its first music department head. And just to deviate from my notes for just a moment, I was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana earlier this week at a conference, and they had some magazines on display, and there was an article with a timeline of HBCUs. And at the very earliest, or at the beginning end of that timeline, they had Oberlin College and Berea College. And I said, well, why are they here as an HBCU? Now, these were institutions that were open and welcoming to blacks, but for all intents and purposes, we wouldn't consider Oberlin and Berea HBCUs. But this is some published information that's going out there. So it's very important that we do as we're doing today, verify facts, try to put the correct information out there to the public. This is a slide about the work family of conductors, composers, music educators, and musicologists. 3 generations of this family had direct or indirect influence and impact on the Fisk instrumental music tradition. John Wirt Sr. was a choral conductor. Some of the original Jubilee singers were in choirs that he conducted. His son, John Wirt Jr., or John W. Wirt II, is actually best known as for songs such as Go Tell It on the Mountain. But he also, to Fiskites, is well known as composer of the Golden Blue, the Fisk alma mater, where he had help from his wife Agnes Wirt. John Wirt Jr. was class of 1895, his wife Agnes was class of 1897, and his brother Frederick Monroe Wirt also helped in their early efforts as musicologists in terms of documenting black folk songs from around the South and other regions. John W. Wirt III became a very distinguished composer, conductor, musicologist. And then there's another member of the Wirt family that I didn't know about until I started doing this research. This is Julian Cassandra Wirt. The only 2 I have photographs of in this display are John W. Wirt II in the center and John W. Wirt III. Well, Julian Cassandra was actually John III's younger brother. And he started off at Fisk as a sociology major, but he had a passion for music. As a teenager, he was a jazz pianist, performed locally, and so he ended up changing his major from sociology to music, and he actually studied under his older brother, John III. Well, Julian Cassandra went to New York, and his career in music spanned from vaudeville all the way to the era of television. These are 2 Fisk music alumni that have a direct connection to TSU. On the left is Martha M. Brown. She was Fisk class of 1900. But she also continued studies at the American Conservatory in Chicago. I couldn't verify if she was an instrumentalist, but I did want to include her because of the direct TSU connection. And the gentleman on the right is Noah W. Ryder. He was the first music director at TSU when TSU opened in 1912. So it's very interesting to see that Fisk had a direct impact at the very beginning of TSU. There are 2 buildings on the campus of TSU that have been named for Martha Brown over the years. The first is now known as the Harold M. Love Senior Learning Resource Center, but that was originally the Brown Memorial Library. And then the building where I work currently is the Brown-Daniel Library. So it's also named for Martha M. Brown, along with the second library director, Lois Daniel. But as you see, you have that particular connection. One last thing about Ryder, to kind of tie him in as an instrumentalist, I ran across at least one reference that said that Noah Ryder accompanied Roland Hayes. He was also part of a quartet that sang at Ellis Shepherd Moore's funeral in 1914 that included John Wirt Jr. and Frederick Wirt. And I think the fourth person in the quartet was Thomas W. Talley, phys chemistry professor who was also a bass singer and a folklorist. We'll switch gears here and look at someone from the jazz era. This is Lillian O'Leal Hardin Armstrong. This particular photograph is of Louis Armstrong's Hot Five. And so the gentleman playing the trombone is Kid Ory. Next to him is Louis Armstrong. The person playing clarinet is Johnny Dodds. Lillian Hardin Armstrong is at the piano, and the gentleman playing banjo is Johnny St. Cyr. Well, they made some landmark early jazz recordings. Lillian O'Leal went to Fisk, but she left in 1917 and went to Chicago. She was what they call was called a song plugger. She worked in a music store and actually demonstrated songs. According to one account, the famous pianist Jelly Roll Morton actually showed up at the store where she was working and decided he was going to teach this little girl a few lessons. And so he kind of, bumps off the piano and he does his thing. But then Lillian actually comes back with some of her Fisk classical training. And she wipes Jelly Roll Morton off the stand or off the piano. But she was an incredible lady. A lot of people don't realize that she had that direct Fisk connection and is important in the history of jazz. One of their compositions is Strutting with Some Barbecue. Even though they divorced some years later, they remained friendly except for when it came to that particular song. They fought over the rights to compose a credit to Strutting with Some Barbecue. The next person we'll mention we can't be too brief because it's Jimmy Lunsford, class of 25. He was a Fisk Renaissance man and one of the top jazz band leaders of his day. And just to give you a little bit about Jimmy, not only was he a musician, he was not a music major though. He was a sociology major. He idolized W.E.B. Du Bois. He actually dated Du Bois' daughter, Yolanda. But Du Bois wasn't too happy about Yolanda dating the flashy Jimmy Lunsford, man about campus. But Jimmy Lunsford was so amazing because, and just to give you this information, he was a star athlete in football, basketball, baseball, track, and even boxing. He was president of the senior class and the University Athletic Association. He sang with the Mozart Society, now known as the Fisk University Choir, and the Glee Club. I think we saw a slide earlier of one of the early Fisk Glee Clubs. He directed local church choirs, he played piano at the Andrew Jackson Hotel, and he conducted the Fisk Student Orchestra, which included a number of future members of his band. At its peak, the Lunsford Orchestra was considered the equal of jazz groups led by Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Benny Goodman, and other top band leaders. One person quoted the legendary jazz vocalist John Hendricks as saying at one point, even Ellington wanted his band to be like Lunsford's, which was considered to be the best educated because it had so many Fisk college men in the band, the best dressed band, the best sounding band, most versatile big band because they were pioneers in the aspect of adding showmanship to the music. One of his top soloists was Willie Smith, alto saxophonist, but he actually graduated from Fisk with a chemistry degree. After the demise of the band with Lunsford's passing in 1947, Willie Smith actually joined the Duke Ellington Orchestra and became a featured soloist with that particular organization. One more thing before we leave jazz for the moment. is another Fisk student named Gladys Riddle. Attended Fisk and graduated in the early 1920s. Well, she went on to California, joining her mother, and she became a successful seamstress or dress designer for Metro Mayor, or MGM. She met a young jazz musician named Lionel Hampton in 1932. They married in 1936, and she became not only his wife, but his business manager and booking agent. So there's even a Fisk connection to the great Lionel Hampton Orchestra. Now, this lady, Dr. Undine Smith Moore, was there around the same time as Lunsford, but her forte was classical music and choral music. She was valedictorian of the class of 1926. As you see from the caption, she was called the Dean of Black Women Composers and a noted music educator. She wrote her first major composition while she was a Fisk student. It was called Sir Olaf and the Earl King's Daughter, and it was a choral piece based on Norwegian folklore. Well, she went on to a very long and distinguished career at Virginia State University, teaching there from 1927 to 1972. She was founder of that university's Black Music Center, and two of her most famous former students were the opera singer Camilla Williams. A lot of people know about Marian Anderson, but Camilla Williams, a student of Dr. Undine Smith Moore, was the first African-American woman to sing a leading role with a major American opera company. And she sang the national anthem at the 1963 March on Washington. The other of her most famous former students is the noted jazz pianist, composer, author, broadcaster, and educator, Dr. Billy Taylor. Moore composed a piece for the Fisk Jubilee Singers Centennial in 1971. When she retired from Virginia State in 72, she was honored at Town Hall in New York City. She received honorary doctorates from Virginia State and Indiana universities. In 1973, she received a humanitarian award from Fisk. Well, after her retirement, she became even more prolific. She had more time to compose. And so she continued to compose music. Her 16-part oratorio for chorus, solo voices, orchestra, and narrator, Scenes from the Life of a Martyr, based on the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., premiered at Carnegie Hall in 1980, and was nominated for the 1982 Pulitzer Prize in Music. Her last major composition was Soweto in 1987, and it was inspired by the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa. This is the Kennedy family of concert pianists and music educators. Professor McKissick has a wonderful profile on Dr. Matthew Kennedy that I think everyone received if you got the packet. But you also see in the photographs Ann Gamble Kennedy, his wife, and then on the right is their daughter, Nina Gamble Kennedy. Well, both of them served many years on the Fisk faculty. Actually, Ann Gamble finished Fisk before her husband. She finished in 1941, and Matthew didn't get his Fisk degree until 1947 because he served in World War II and his studies were interrupted. And I think an earlier speaker mentioned that they were duo pianists on occasion. That's why you see them playing together. And of course, someone else also alluded to the award-winning documentary film that Nina Gamble Kennedy produced, Matthew Kennedy, One Man's Journey. I don't know if it was part of the film or just an interview, but according to Nina, she felt her mother was a better pianist than her father. Coming back to the realm of jazz, this is Consuela Lee. Well, Consuela entered Fisk in 1944 to pursue studies in classical piano. Well, she was sort of like Lillian Hardin Armstrong and Dr. Kennedy, in that she was a child prodigy. And just backing up for just a second, I didn't mention this about Lillian. Lillian was from Memphis, and she was a child prodigy on the piano, played at church, played at her school, but she got interested in the blues. And so she actually got punished by her family for playing W.C. Handy's St. Louis Blues. So her family actually sent her to Fisk to get the blues out of her system. But as you can tell, that didn't work. Well, Consuela kind of ran into a similar situation, not quite as bad when she came to Fisk. But she had the added advantage that both of her parents were skilled musicians. Her father played cornet and trumpet and was the band director at Florida A&M. Her mother was a classical pianist and teacher. One of the first jazz songs that she said she heard, according to an interview with her daughter, Monica Moorhead, was "Strutting with Some Barbecue." So she had a lifelong interest and passion in jazz that she pursued kind of on the side while she was at Fisk. She met a gentleman named Alfonso Seville in one of the Fisk practice rooms. Now, he was a Meharry medical student, but he was a very proficient jazz pianist. And so Consuela would just buttonhole this guy and say, well, teach me what you know, teach me what you know. And so after she graduated from Fisk with her degree in music, she went on to teach at a number of HBCUs. She taught at Alabama State, she taught at Hampton, she taught at Talladega, she taught at Norfolk State. She also received a master's degree in theory and composition from Northwestern in 1959. She also studied at Peabody and Eastman Schools of Music. In jazz, she worked with major artists including Sarah Vaughan, Max Roach, Milt Jackson, and the bassist Richard Davis. She had a family group called the Descendants of Mike and Phoebe, which included her brother, bassist Bill Lee. Her famous nephew is the acclaimed filmmaker Spike Lee. Well, Consuela retired from college teaching in 1979, and she focused her energies on reviving Snow Hill Institute in Alabama. This was founded in 1893 by her grandfather. And she turned it into a cultural and creative arts center and introduced young children to jazz and recruited many of her family and musical colleagues to come and support her in that effort in Alabama. Her famous nephew Spike was present for the Snow Hill Centennial in 1993. This is a picture of Fisk piano professor Lois Toles, who was at Fisk in the 1950s. She's actually in a photograph with the TSU String Quartet. And just to give you the names, on the far left is W.O. Smith. He's playing the viola. Next to him is Brenton Banks on violin. Brenton Banks and W.O. Smith became the first two African-American members of the Nashville Symphony. Professor Toles is seated in the middle at the piano. Next to her is Dave Kimbrell on cello. He was a graduate student at TSU who was a former bassist with the Duke Ellington Orchestra. And then on the right is Maureen Stovall, and she's playing the second violin. She was also a TSU music faculty member. So it was interesting to see that interaction between the campuses even back then. The next person also has dual connections to Fisk and TSU. This is Professor Carol Stone Gafford, where she graduated from Fisk in 1959. She was a protege of Matthew Kennedy. She went on to do graduate study at Indiana University, and she collaborated with the jazz/classical composer David Baker on a number of his original compositions before coming back to Nashville, and she enjoyed a very long, distinguished tenure on the TSU music faculty until she retired in 2008. This is Arthur Cunningham, jazz composer, pianist from the 1960s, another Fisk graduate. This is Ted Jarrett, He attended Fisk in the 40s and 50s before he got into the music business as a songwriter. He had success as a country and rhythm and blues songwriter. He always had a dream of completing a Fisk degree and finally got his Fisk degree in 1974. This is Tom Wilson. He did not finish Fisk, but he went to Boston, became part of the Harvard Jazz Society, and then he became a record label owner and a record producer. He produced many of the landmark recordings of the 1960s. In this photograph, he's with Bob Dylan. He also produced records by Simon and Garfunkel, Frank Zappa, the Mothers of Invention, Eric Burden, and the Animals. So he's involved in a lot of the classic rock recordings of the 1960s. This is Fisk's first ethnomusicologist, Dr. Darius Teemer. He came to Fisk in around 1970 and had a long, productive tenure with the university. He was also a bassist who played in the Nashville Symphony. These are two Fisk alums that have had success in the gospel music industry. On the left is Lanier Ferguson, who was a former Fisk Jubilee singer and also involved as a singer-songwriter with the Modern Black Mass gospel choir at Fisk. And then on the right is Derek Lee, the longtime musical director for the Bobby Jones Gospel Show. I know I'm running short. Next, I see you walking. This is Fisk composer in residence, Robert L. Bob Holmes Jr. He was a landmark Renaissance person in terms of music. He was successful in classical, jazz, gospel, rhythm and blues, almost virtually any style of music he was able to compose, arrange, produce in. And he was instrumental in creating a group called the Orchestrated Crowd, which I'm proud to say I got to be a part of during that particular era. And we combined all sorts of instrumentation from symphonic to African percussion and electronic instruments. This is John Betts. He's an acclaimed jazz percussionist who worked for many years with the noted soprano saxophonist Steve Lacy in Europe. And after Steve Lacy passed, John continued his career in Europe, but he started right here in Nashville at Fisk. And he also had his own group called the John Betts Society that recorded an acclaimed album called Earth Blossom, which also included Bob Holmes, Fisk English professor / percussionist, Dr. Philip Royster, and others. This is Dr. K. George Roberts, conductor, violinist, music educator, Fisk class of 1972. She's conducted many of the major American symphony orchestras. Over her career, she's worked at the University of Massachusetts Lowell and retired from there in 2013. She does a project called the UML String Project, which seeks to increase diversity in concert and symphonic music. This is harpist Alfred Johnson Reagan. She was a member of the Orchestrated Crowd, and one of the unique features of our group was that we had a full string section, harpist, big band, extended African percussion section. So it was a very unique sound. Alfred's continued her career in New York, and she does a lot of solo work. She actually performed at the wedding of Eddie Murphy, so she gets a lot of requests for special private functions. This young lady didn't graduate from Fisk, but she's a Grammy Award-winning R&B artist. Her name is Hazel Payne. She was with a group called Taste of Honey, and they recorded a song called Boogie Oogie Oogie that went to #1. Then another hit record that they had was called Sukiyaki, and she played the Japanese koto on that record. It also went to #1, and they actually won the Grammy for Best New Artist in 1979. This is Cassie Gardner Jr., someone else who attended Fisk and had a long career in jazz and R&B as an organist, keyboardist. He went to Los Angeles and became part of Solar Records, which was started by another Nashvilleian, Dick Griffey. He had a number of hit records as a producer and songwriter with Solar Records. The 12th president of Fisk University, Dr. John L. Smith, is, as far as I can tell, the only musician that's ever been president of Fisk. But he was a classical tubist, brass instrumentalist, before he got into administration and his tenure as Fisk's 12th president. So Fisk has actually had a musician as president. And then since I'm out of time, I just want to just take a little personal privilege and talk about some of my personal family connections. My sister, Linda Moon Ely, is a class of 69. I think she's a classmate of Dr. Mitchell. She was a piano major at Fisk. My brother, who happens to be here, William S. Moon, is a former Fisk faculty member from 1984 to 89. He was chair of the department 1988-89. My brother James worked with Bob Holmes and Ted Jarrett with his group. They produced their group in the 1970s. Another brother played with Dr. Tiemann in the Nashville Symphony, Edward Moon. My brother M.P. Moon was part of the Fisk Woodwind Quintet that was organized by Vandal Rogers in the 70s. He's still on the Fisk faculty as part of the art department. I kind of mentioned my connections as far as being a member of the orchestrated crowd and the Black Bass Choir. And then my wife, actually, she's here today, Marilyn Kenya Moon, and she actually got to work with Bob Holmes in the 80s, part of a production he produced called The Cotton Club. Remember, I'm out of time, but I hope you enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Professor Moon, for that very informative presentation. And it just is really the tip of the iceberg when it comes to all the contributions that Fisk University has made. And continuing with that theme of music, now that we have that historical background. Earlier this morning, we were mesmerized by the Fisk Jubilee singers, and we want to continue that with the 3 Fisk tenors. This is a group that has been formed to not only represent Fisk as a specialty group, showing the many diversities of music being taught at Fisk University. These are young men who represent Fisk. They are chartered members of this, the tenures, and they are also members of the Fisk Jubilee Singers. We heard them this morning. There are actually 3 of you. Okay, someone's missing. Oh, there you are. Okay. I thought I was going to have to step in. Okay, I'm Motown. I'm not operatic, believe me. So, anyway, just kind of wave your hand and they can see who you are. Dwayne Mitchell. There's Dwayne. He is a sophomore pursuing his bachelor's of music and vocal performance, and he plans a career in entertainment. We have Torrin Brown. Torrin is a junior, a bachelor of music. He is majoring in vocal performance and plans to explore the visual experimental field of performing arts as well as opera and musical theater. And Leonte. Ooh. 47 years of dealing with names of students. Savala. He is a graduating senior at Fisk University, completing his Bachelor of Science in Music. And he plans to continue his career in opera and musical theater while continuing his passion to teach. Their vocal teacher and advisor is the Gwendolyn Brown, who is currently artist in residence in Voice at Fisk University, presenting the 3 tenures.
lending us your precious time and indulging us with our passion. Now we'll have some words from our chair of the department, Dr. Archer.
Thank you, Leonte. Today has been exciting. It's the first history conference that I have been to, I believe, since I was an undergraduate. I have 3 degrees in piano performance. But it was such an exciting day to hear, especially about Fisk University's first 150 years. And I have to say first 150 years because as we've heard so much about her art and her music and her contributions, what you've seen in this last half hour is the current Fisk, the beginning of the next 150 years. And I've made it very well known to my dean that I hope to be around for at least the first part of that 150 years. You have, and I'm sorry that we ran out, but you have some information about the 3 Fisk tenors. We're very proud of the students in the music program. We not only offer majors in voice, but also piano, organ, strings, and winds. And if you would like to be on our mailing list, I've given you a card where you can give us some information so that we can let you know what else is coming up this semester, because it's a very exciting semester. In fact, the young men that you're listening to now will have a full concert later in the term, and we're very happy to present them to you. So I'll be up at the top after the program, and we'll be glad to take the cards with your information on it, so that we can keep in touch with you. Thank you for giving us your time today. Thank you for giving me the last couple of minutes. But let me direct your attention back to the 3 Fisk tenors.
God on high
Thank you so much for that wonderful performance. I may not be here in the next 150 years, but I plan on being here at least the next 20 years. And I'm going to watch these young men as they travel down life's journey. And I'm sure, God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll see your names up in lights. Thank you so much for that. I remember when I first started teaching at Hume-Fogg Academic Magnet School. I taught the first AP class, and I had very bright students, and there was one young lady who sat right up front, and just like a sponge, she absorbed everything I had to say, and was one of the best students I ever taught. And there's a lot to say, considering I'm talking about Hume-Fogg, one of the top schools in the nation, high school public schools. I said, well, this young lady must come from good genes and good home training. Something's going on here. And then I met her father, Professor James Corrin, who's a professor of history at Fisk University and has been teaching here since 1981. And I saw where all that was coming from. An outstanding scholar. He's a graduate of the University of Oregon, and he received his PhD from the University of Minnesota. He has written published book, The Ethiopian History, on Ethiopian History, the Evolution of Ethiopian Jews. And he has another book in progress, and it's entitled Ethiopia, Africa, and Pan-African World History and Selected Articles, and he's going to share with us this morning the Fisk connection with Africa, which goes back and continues to this day, 1866 to 2012. Dr. Corrin. By the way, you do have an evaluation form. Look in your packet of material and begin to fill that out. Appreciate you being here, and happy Valentine's.
Good afternoon. I realize I stand between you and whatever you're going to do the rest of the day, so bear with me. Don't worry, I'm not going to sing. Before I start, I'd like to first acknowledge my better two-thirds. Wilma, stand up. She's always been my main supporter for the last quarter century at least. So when I first came to Fisk in 1981, as you said, thank you for that surprising introduction. I never expected that. I didn't know where you were going. My daughter, Elsabeth. I had several conferences in Africa and Europe, and I spent 4 years in Ethiopia before I got to Fisk. Another year something about Fisk. They'd heard the name. Europeans would come up to me and say, "Oh, glad you're here from Fisk," et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And first I was surprised, but after I've been to Fisk for a while now, it's not surprising. So Fisk has a larger reputation than it has a size, and I think it always has had that. So this particular research deals with an overview of the connections between Fisk and Africa, as mentioned in those dates on the PowerPoint. It has 3 parts to it. First of all, when I was first asked to give some information about Fisk in Africa, 2 African Studies conferences back in 95, 2000, I had to first go and find out in more detail, what existed. So obviously I went to Fisk Special Collections. That's where it all is. I went through every catalog from the beginning to the present. And I found that in the late 19th century, early 20th century, the first thing that occurred that was well documented was the fact that there were 10 Fisk students who became missionaries in Africa, starting in 1878 and continuing until the 1930s. So that's my first topic. The second topic is Fisk began to eventually teach about Africa, but not at the beginning. At the beginning, Fisk was Greek and Latin and European history and French and German and all that good stuff. Harvard of the South, etc. But by the 1870s, a little bit about Africa, but very little. But there were students at Fisk, and of course it was founded by the AMA, so therefore there was this impetus to have something to do with Africa. And there were students who were encouraged to go as missionaries. So I found 10 students who went as missionaries at that time. And finally, in the early 20th century, they began to actually teach courses first on African American history. And you can't teach African American history without some African background. We still do that. So 1912 was the first course. I'll get to that. And finally, by the 1930s, Fisk began to actually teach about Africa itself in more detail, and that has continued to the present. At a not very large level, but definitely part of the curriculum. So I don't need to go over this. This was well gone over by my colleague, Dr. Mitchell. And founding of Fisk. I do have a couple pictures. Here's the famous Erastus Milo Cravath. By chance, several years ago, it turned out that I now live on Cravath Drive. Of course, my students say, "What, you live in Cravath?" Because that's the name of an academic building. I said, no. It just happens to be a drive named after him. And of course, here's Clinton B. Fisk, 2 of the principal people involved in the founding of Fisk. All right, so in 1875 in the catalog, you can read this mission statement. It is earnestly hoped by those who labor in this institution that it may in the not distant future aid largely in the evangelization of Africa. So this was one of the missions of Fisk. It's one that was always there publicly, but it wasn't the only mission, of course. I'll come to more of that. So here's Africa today, 50 plus countries. For those that don't know a whole lot about Africa, this is a relative map showing the size of Africa. How many people knew it was this large? Yes, raise your hand. Great. So another way of saying it is the continent of Africa could encompass 3 United States maps. So you see here Europe, United States, and China. So it is not a country, as I tell my students every time. Many countries with many different cultures and peoples. Great diversity, but also some commonalities. So at the time I'm talking about in the late 19th century, this is colonial Africa, and I'll mention where the students went when they went to become missionaries. 4 of them went to Sierra Leone, West Africa. 1 went to Liberia for a short time. 3 went to Mozambique. 1 went to southern Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. And 1 spent a long time several decades in the Congo, which is now still the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So the first 7 of the first 10 missionaries are these people here: Albert and Ada Miller, Andrew and Ella Jackson, Benjamin and Henrietta Owsley, and Nancy Jones. So this occurred in 1878 when the AMA issued a call for Fisk students to volunteer to go to Africa as missionaries. Albert Miller was already interested in doing that, as well as the other first 4. Conveniently, and I haven't figured out exactly the personal dynamics of this, but Albert married Ada Roberts, and they became a team, couple. And Andrew Jackson married Ella Eldridge, and they became a couple. It was convenient to send people together to Africa. So they didn't spend a long time there. Here's a little bit more about them. Albert Miller was raised in Mississippi, but he was freed in Davidson County. So he came to Davidson County and entered Fisk in the 1870s and got his degree at Fisk in 1878 after he had actually left Fisk. But anyway, he still was awarded a degree, bachelor's degree. When he left, he uttered the famous words, "Your sons and daughters are ever on the altar." This is still a Fisk motto. Of course, there are many altars, and they're not all missionary altars. I'll discuss that briefly also. Albert Miller had a short but distinguished career in Sierra Leone. As you can see there, he presided at the funeral of the famous Simke, or Simbe Pute, who was one of the Amistad people who went back to Africa. Unfortunately, his wife got ill, and they had to come back from Sierra Leone early. So they came back after only 2 years. She died shortly thereafter, actually. Albert went on to a distinguished career as a Fisk alum. He was involved in alumni activities heavily, became a minister, got another degree, Bachelor of Divinity, and continued. Andrew Jackson was from Clarksville, and he had some connection with the famous Andrew Jackson. It's not exactly sure what the lines were. And he went also to Sierra Leone, and when they came back, in his case after 5 years, they went to Missouri, and he became a minister in Missouri. He never finished his Fisk education, and neither did their 2 wives. So this famous building no longer exists, but now we have new Livingston Hall. This is the original Livingston Hall, Livingston Missionary Hall, named for the famous missionary David Livingston. Opened in 1882, started a few years before that. So you can see the missionary connection is definitely there. This building no longer exists at all, even in a secondary form. So Bennett Hall was originally called the Theological Building, and then it was named after Reverend H.S. Bennett, who was a preacher and professor at Fisk. Opened in 1892. So you can see there was a strong, in these early years, there was a strong missionary push for people to go to Fisk. These are 3 more Fiskites who went to different parts of Africa. John Pierce went to several places that you see over about a 15-year period. Cora Pear, I haven't found out how long she was there. Information disappears after she first went. But Althea Brown Edmondson was a famous missionary in Africa. 2 different pictures at different parts of her life. She got a degree from Fisk. She went to the Congo in a Presbyterian mission. This happened to be a very interesting mission which involved both black and white missionaries. It was founded by black and white missionaries, and there were black and white missionaries there when she went there. She married another missionary while she was there. They had a couple of children. One of her children went to Fisk, and her granddaughter went to Fisk. So they all became Fiskites. And she herself became a fairly well-known scholar at the time of the Bakuba, or the Kuba people in the Congo. She wrote a dictionary of their language, which I found in a book that I had about the Kuba's history in the Congo. It was referred to by a well-known scholar of that people. So she made a scholarly contribution as well as missionary. I found two early Fisk students who were from Africa, one from Liberia and one from Sierra Leone, and one of the Amistad, sons of one of the Amistad people who came back and studied at Fisk. He was a contemporary at Fisk with W.E.B. Du Bois. However, there's more to be found, I'm sure, but in the Fisk records, I don't think he ever went back to Africa, actually. He came to Fisk to be trained as a missionary to go back. So that exhausts the first 10 people that went as missionaries. The second category of people, the second category of Fisk being involved with Africa, had to do with this topic of Africa being the background for studying African American. And of course, W.E.B. Du Bois is the most famous Fisk graduate in a lot of ways, but he got interested in Africa while he was at Fisk. And I have another paper on that. I'm not going to talk about that right now. His emerging consciousness about Africa, when he became the best-known Pan-Africanist in the 20th century, it started when he came to Fisk, ironically, because we didn't teach about Africa, but there was kind of an African presence in the Jubilee Singers, in the artwork that already was there. There's some Fisk art collection, which we heard about this morning. They have pieces from Africa. So Du Bois found, interest in Africa, but he hadn't yet started to study it. But as he said later, he was interviewed in the early 60s, 1960s, by somebody. And in this interview, he was quoted as saying, Africa was in the background while he was at Fisk, but not in the foreground yet. Here's a picture of Du Bois' graduating class with him on. You can see which one he is on the bottom left there. All right, in the early 20th century, a new president came to Fisk, George Gates, and he was interested in making Fisk, as he put it, more relevant to the local community. And so he encouraged the establishment of new courses, new approaches. It was during this time that George Edmund Haynes came to Fisk. He came back to Fisk. He was a Fisk graduate of 2003, and he went on to get his doctorate. He came back to Fisk and was involved in social work, yes, but he also taught the first course in African American history that I could find a record of in 1912. So this was an exciting topic, the first course in African American history. Of course, he must have had something on Africa in there. In fact, one of the books he used was Du Bois' first book, which was the suppression of the slave trade in the United States. It was Du Bois' dissertation at Harvard, which was later published in 1996 as a book. That was one of the books used in this class. I haven't found yet what else might have been used. There might be some records. The course was History of the Negro in America, and another course, The Negro Problem, as it was put in those days. So these courses were new courses at Fisk. There hadn't been anything about this at Fisk before that. It's a start. Haynes stayed at Fisk until he left to join the U.S. Labor Department, as I said. Okay, A.A. Taylor was a scholar of African American history. He wrote 3 books on the Reconstruction period in the United States, including one of them while he was at Fisk, the one on Tennessee. He came in the late 1920s, became the dean, and he has amazing accomplishments which haven't been researched enough, but I'm sure Revis and I will do more with that. His papers are in the special collections. So Taylor did teach courses on African American history, and then Charles S. Johnson, of course, came and taught African American sociology, among many other things. Started the Race Relations Institute, and eventually was the first black president of Fisk. This is a scene from the Race Relations Institute meetings that she sponsored, summer institutes every year. You've heard of most of these famous scholars already today. Let me mention the last one in more depth, Lorenzo Turner. So Lorenzo Turner was a scholar of African anthropology. So he actually studied African cultural items in the United States, especially the Gullah culture on the Atlantic coast. So he was a well-known scholar and published quite a bit. Edwin Smith was another scholar who was brought to Fisk as a consultant on African studies. So we find here in the late 20s and 30s, especially the first full treatment in scholarship of Africa as a topic. First in anthropology, but also in linguistics, in history, and eventually in art and music, and so on. That goes back to the 1930s, at least. So there were many manifestations of different parts of this type of curriculum. They were called different things. The courses that were offered were not always offered in the regular departments, but they created new programs and brought new people in to teach these courses. So they had 10 or 12 courses in the late 30s and 40s, especially by the early 40s, this program in 1943-44. Anthropology, economics, etc., as you see. And it was both at the graduate and undergraduate level. There was discussion of starting a real graduate program in cooperation with other universities. That never got off the ground as far as I know. International Student Center was a part of the new international emphasis after World War II. The United States, a major factor in World War II. The United States wanted to play a role in the world to a greater degree than previously, no longer be isolationist as after World War I. And Fisk joined that trend, especially under the president at the time, Thomas Jones, between 1926 and 1946. He was pushing for more scholarship in many areas, including Africa. So the International Student Center was an innovative area where people could come and talk and meet and discuss and have films. The wife of one of our former professors at Fisk, Orpha Schrag, was the director of this for decades. And she's been enthusiastic about talking about it. By the early 50s, there was less emphasis on Africa for a while, but then in the 60s, it stepped up again. Of course, in the world, this was a time of African nationalism movements, African independence movements, African liberation movements. And so Fisk also became more active in teaching more courses on Africa at this time, including many areas. Stanley Samkangi was one of the historians, originally from, at that time it was called Rhodesia, today Zimbabwe. He wrote an award-winning book on the origins of Rhodesia, which is an analysis of the way in which colonialism was foisted upon the area, which was then named for the colonizer Cecil Rhodes. At least he named it for himself. Samkangi wrote the best book, it's still the best book on that topic. He wrote that in the late 60s, just before he came to Fisk. While he was at Fisk, he wrote a survey history of Africa. Unfortunately, he only stayed 2 years. In the 1970s also, there was some push by the U.S. government to increase more things dealing with Africa. And USAID, Agency for International Development, had programs to do that, and one of their programs included Fisk. So students could get internships, they could get paid for research and going to Africa and doing research. Fisk has gone up and down in a lot of ways, and finances is usually the reason why we go down at a certain point. From the beginning, as Dr. Mitchell mentioned this morning, after 4 years, no money. So the problem is still there, but we make do. So financial crises in the mid-1970s affected all these courses that existed on Africa. At one time there were something like six or eight courses on Africa only, including many courses, about 5 at least in history. There we go. 7, I said, okay. Another financial crisis 2 years after I got to Fisk came in 1983. The older people in the crowd will remember this. The younger people had no idea of it. But Fisk hadn't paid his bills. The gas was turned off. Students came to class with gloves and coats. But we still taught. They still came. And it got better. And it's gotten a little worse. Now it's trying to get better again. In all of this, we have had reductions in how many people and how many courses can be taught in areas such as Africa, which I think is certainly vital and essential, but not everybody always agrees with that. So some reductions have taken place, and the problem has been when people retire or go to another school or pass away, sometimes they're not replaced. So courses that they taught disappear. Hopefully we can improve that in the next Fisk Renaissance, whenever that may be. I thought we might have a few Fisk administrators here, but I don't see any except for Revis, of course. But there have been a variety of courses offered from the 1930s to the present, and we still carry on. We're still offering courses on Africa. We still use Africa as a background to African America, and there's always an interest, and sometimes a great interest among students to know more about Africa. Of course, in the World and its Peoples, I do a substantial amount on Africa because most world history classes still today in other institutions do not do enough on Africa. It still gets pushed to the side. So I'll do what I can to try to rectify that. And almost. Thank you. I think I have a couple minutes. Almost there. 2 slides, I think. So we have a lot of students who have come to Africa, from Africa to Fisk, as well as people of African diaspora who come to Fisk from the islands. So we've had a steady stream over many, many years, going back to the 1870s, as I said. And it's still continuing. So we have many students from Nigeria right now. We've had students from many countries that you see listed here. These are just the ones I remember personally, and the ones that we still have. So Ethiopia now, there's some, etc. And many from many of the islands who are imbued with African culture quite often, even though they may not realize it at first, unless they actually start investigating it. And more students asking about opportunities to study in Africa. So there's still a connection, still an interest. And these are some current and recent courses. And here's Africa Today again. All right. I'd like to have questions, but I know we don't have time for that sort of stuff. But I'll be here if anybody wants to ask me anything. Thank you very much.
I think I can be heard. I get the part to say goodbye and thank you for coming. I hope that you've all enjoyed this 35th conference. This is the award-winning local conference on African American history and culture in Nashville, Tennessee. It was certainly fulfilling today to see an institution that means so much to me highlighted, and so many of you to come out and be a part of that. And we play a part in history. You remember your history, and we will celebrate our history. Thank you. We look forward to seeing you next year. You're dismissed. Thank you very much.